Chapter 526. What's that? Du Feynman only saw a blur in front of his eyes. He only saw a gray shadow flash by, and in the next second, it disappeared in front of him. This made him stop walking forward and look at Zhang Hai with some doubts. Oh, it's nothing. It's just a rabbit. We have a lot of wild rabbits here, and they taste pretty good. But I didn't know if you would eat them, so I didn't make any for you. Compared to Du Feynman, Zhang Hai's eyesight wasn't something he could compare with. After casually chatting with Moses Adams for a bit, he hung up the phone and explained to Du Feynman. Rabbit? Or wild? Ugh, forget it. Westerners, including people from the Middle East, still had some resistance to wild things. After all, no one knew what parasites and bacteria were on these guys. If they ate the wrong one. Therefore, it was better to raise them at home. It was also because he knew these guys' feelings that Zhang Hai didn't make any for them. Just when they felt that this topic was over and were ready to move on, another figure suddenly flashed by. But this time, the figure was much bigger than the rabbit. This figure was about 1.5 meters tall, and more than 3 meters long including its tail. It was a huge feline. When they saw this guy, not only were Du Feynman and the bodyguards behind him shocked, even Zhang Hai was shocked. And just when these people were a little confused, the huge figure that was originally chasing the rabbit couldn't help but stop. After it completely stopped, Zhang Hai also saw this guy's appearance. It was a huge lion. It was even bigger than the African lion he saw in the zoo. However, it looked like an African lioness. It didn't have any hair around its neck. After standing still, Zhang Hai glanced at this guy with his eyes. This guy's shoulder height was about 1.2 meters. When it raised its head, it was at least 1.5 meters, almost reaching Zhang Hai's chest. Its total length was about 3 meters. This huge appearance made Zhang Hai a little confused. At this time, Du Feynman was slowly approaching his bodyguards. As for his bodyguards, they had already put their hands in their clothes, ready to pull out their guns at any time. If this wasn't Zhang Hai's manner, but something like Africa, they might have already shot. As for Zhang Hai, looking at it, he didn't know why, but he felt some familiarity in his heart. Familiar. Looking at the lion, Zhang Hai couldn't help but gawk. His manor did have some lions, but they were only mountain lions, right? The biggest lioness was not even 2/3 of this guy's size. He didn't seem to have seen this guy before. But suddenly, he remembered Big, Little Huang, Xiao Bai, and the others. After these guys absorbed his aura, they seemed to have broken through their own limits and grew bigger and bigger. Then, could this guy be that mountain lion? Thinking of this, Zhang Hai deliberately glanced at its face. Sure enough, fur had grown out. But there was indeed a scar on its face. Seeing this, Zhang Hai was even more sure that this should be the mountain lion. It's okay, don't be nervous. Since it's the mountain lion, Zhang Hai was relieved. The guy who absorbed his aura was like his pet. It won't take the initiative to attack him. So after Zhang Hai greeted Du Feynman and the others, he walked in front of the mountain lion, slowly stretched out his hand, and touched its head. And just when Zhang Hai's hand touched its head, the mountain lion's eyes narrowed and made a smiling expression. Then, like a kitten, it rubbed its head against Zhang Hai's hand. Ah! Looking at the situation in front of them, Du Feynman and the others were stunned. This giant beast was raised by Zhang Hai? Okay, you scared my friend. Go play in the forest. After scratching the mountain lion's head for a while, Zhang Hai patted its head. Seeing that it had grown so big, Zhang Hai also felt that he should go into his forest to take a look. Thinking about it, he hadn't gone in for a while, but that would have to wait until Du Feynman and the others left. After patting the mountain lion's head, Zhang Hai gave it a new order and transferred some aura to it at the same time. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, the mountain lion finally rubbed Zhang Hai's hand and leaped into the forest next to it. Oh my god, you actually raised such a fierce beast? Seeing that the mountain lion had disappeared, Du Feynman and the others walked over and looked at Zhang Hai in surprise. Their faces were full of disbelief. Hearing his words, Zhang Hai looked at him with contempt. You really know how to talk nonsense. Compared to you rich people in the Middle East, I'm far behind. Do you think I don't surf the internet? You raise leopards, lions, tigers and so on. What's so surprising about a mountain lion like me? Hearing his words, Zhang Hai looked at him with contempt and said. It's not like he hadn't seen those Middle Eastern rich people showing off their pets on the internet. Why would a mountain lion be so surprising? Compared to lions, leopards, and tigers, mountain lions are indeed a little inferior. Mountain lion? You said that guy is a mountain lion? Are you stupid or am I stupid? How can a mountain lion be so big? Brother, don't tell me. You don't know what that is. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Du Feimin couldn't help but laugh. If it's not a mountain lion, then what is it? Hearing his words, Zhang Hai froze for a moment. That was indeed a mountain lion. As for why it was so big, would he tell you that it was because of Zhang Hai's spiritual energy? But no matter how much spiritual energy it had, it was still just a mountain lion. If I'm not wrong, that should be a brutal lion. It's been extinct for 10,000 years. I really didn't expect it to still be alive here. Du Feimin looked at Zhang Hai strangely and said with some excitement. Brutal lion? Hearing his words, Zhang Hai couldn't help but be a little confused. What the hell is that? I'm telling you, you must not let others see that guy again. Otherwise, as long as they leak the news of this guy to the US government, you won't be able to keep this place even if you want to because it will be designated as a brutal lion reserve. Du Feimin had no interest in Zhang Hai's manor because he knew that even if the manor was taken, it wouldn't be sold to him. Most importantly, Zhang Hai and he were friends who had common interests. At least they were still friends for now. However, there were many people who were eyeing Zhang Hai's manor, but now most of these people were blocked by the Walmart group. Also, Zhang Hai didn't let others have any evidence against him. Coupled with his local reputation, he could be as stable as a rock. Of course, he also knew that Zhang Hai still had a trump card, which was the 2 billion oil futures. If someone risked their life to rob Zhang Hai's manor, then he could use these oil futures to enter the Rockefeller family. The Rockefeller family wasn't interested in the manor, they were only interested in oil. So if Zhang Hai took out 2 billion, Rockefeller could guarantee that no one in the US would dare to provoke him. But if an ancient creature that had been extinct for 10,000 years appeared here, then no one could protect this place. Hearing Du Feimin's words, Zhang Hai couldn't help but be a little speechless. It seemed that these lions wouldn't appear so easily in the future. Brutal lion, the scientific name of the North American lion-like lion, was known as the most powerful cat that had ever existed on Earth. If one talked about the powerful cat that had gone extinct, it was estimated that 11 out of 10 people would first think of the saber-toothed tiger. Of course, there were many variants of the saber-toothed tiger, and I won't introduce them one by one. However, the largest saber-toothed tiger was only about 2.7 meters on average. Compared with the 3.5 meters long North American lion-like lion, it was indeed smaller. And the most important thing was that this kind of lion also lived in groups. In the American continent 10,000 years ago, this kind of lion stood at the top of the food chain. But then came the Ice Age, and in the end, they didn't survive that disaster and went extinct 10,000 years ago. This was also what surprised Du Feimin the most. Indeed, if Zhang Hai only raised a mountain lion, he wouldn't care. Just like Zhang Hai said, the rich people in the Middle East raised anything, but Zhang Hai raised an extinct animal, so the 13 slots instantly increased. According to his estimation, if Zhang Hai sold this lion on the black market, it was estimated to be worth more than 10 million. As for an ordinary lion, if it had not been trained, the price of an adult lion in the black market was $20,000. If it had been trained, the price of an adult lion would be $30,000. If it had been trained, the price of an adult lion would be less than $50,000. Leopards were a third cheaper than lions, and tigers were a third more expensive than lions. But basically, there were no animals in the world that could be bought in the black market in Dubai for more than $100,000. But if this one appeared, it would definitely be worth more than $10 million. Hearing Du Feimin's words, Zhang Hai sighed. It was really a little interesting. Looking at the forest in the distance, Zhang Hai chuckled. It seemed that after Du Feimin and the others left this time, his exploration of the forest would have to be put on the agenda. Immediately after, he thanked Du Feimin, and the two of them continued to stroll around the area. They walked all the way to the seaside, and after enjoying the beauty of Zhang Hai's coast, Du Feimin reluctantly left. Of course, it wasn't that he was reluctant to part with Zhang Hai, nor was it that he was reluctant to part with the scenery here. For a rich person like him, in his eyes, The scenery here at Zhonghai's place wasn't bad at all. After all, this place wasn't as beautiful as those famous seascapes. What he was reluctant to part with was the food here at Zhonghai's place. But when he remembered his mission, he still had to hurry back to China. First, he had to study whether he could copy Zhonghai's beef. If that didn't work, then he would see if he could copy Zhonghai's pasture. If that still didn't work, then he had to speed up the construction of the domestic cattle farm and let Zhonghai provide the pasture. Zhonghai didn't care about this. There were some supernatural things that couldn't be easily solved on Earth. For example, Zhonghai's manor. At least in his opinion, this was the world's biggest unsolved mystery. Chapter 527. With the roar of the car engine, Du Feynman and the others left Zhonghai's house. Of course, before leaving, the shape of his car was still very impressive and was taken by many people waiting outside to buy lobsters. Hey! Did the Arab leave? Looking at Zhonghai, who came back alone, Bernice, who was sitting on Zhonghai's recliner and playing with her mobile phone, couldn't help but ask curiously. Hearing her words, Zhonghai shrugged and sat on a stool next to him. How do you know people from the Middle East? Seeing Zhonghai sit down, Bernice asked Zhonghai curiously while playing with her mobile phone. Hearing her words, Zhonghai sat down deliberately, then picked up the drink next to her and took a big sip, then slowly said, "Because I'm also a local tyrant." Listening to Zhonghai's annoying words, Bernice almost threw her mobile phone. How long are you going to stay this time? Bernice suppressed her anger, glanced at Zhonghai, and then asked faintly. Although her voice seemed very flat, Zhonghai felt that when she asked this question, Bernice's eyes were glancing at him. It seemed that she really cared whether Zhonghai would leave or not. Looking at her appearance, Zhonghai couldn't help but chuckle. It seems like this Bernice was quite concerned about him. I won't leave for the time being. Even if I leave, I have to wait until next year. During the Chinese New Year, I'm going to take Delina and Marian back to China. Next year is the 3rd year after my parents died and were buried together, so I'm going to buy a piece of land for them. Delina and Marian are also my daughters. Naturally, I have to go back and burn incense for their grandparents. Hearing Bernice's words, Zhonghai thought for a moment. It seemed that there was nothing to do recently, and the manor was now in the process of development. It was almost time to harvest the grapes. As the manor owner, Zhonghai naturally had to stay to help. After harvesting the grapes, it was time to make wine. Zhonghai was still quite interested in winemaking. After brewing the wine, Zhonghai needed to buy a new batch of cattle. After pacifying the cattle, it was time to store the fodder. Once the drinks and other things were finished, it would be winter. Zhonghai was a very typical northerner. Although he was not afraid of the cold, in winter, it was better to stay at home. Oh! Hearing that Zhonghai would not leave for the time being, Bernice looked back and then played with her mobile phone. Looking at her appearance, Zhonghai also smiled. It seemed that he could not wait for her to get up. In this case, it was better for him to go back to bed and lie down. After stretching, Zhonghai sat up from the chair. Although he was not physically tired, he was mentally tired. After saying goodbye to Bernice, he returned to the room. As soon as he walked in, he found that little Ya was cleaning the house with Delina and Marian. Since Zhonghai brought Delina and Marian back, the cleaning in Zhonghai's manor was done by these 2 girls. In addition, these 2 girls looked like they really had nothing to do. They were like Zhonghai, not too interested in their studies. They could quickly learn what Cindy Clive taught them, and they could draw inferences about other things from one example. There was no problem with their brains. Because even if they were a little stupid, with Zhonghai's aura, it was impossible for them to be stupid even if they wanted to. They were really not interested in learning, so every morning, they tried to make breakfast, but their skills were really average. After giving breakfast to Zhonghai, they learned how to clean the room. They were quite good at this. Zhonghai almost never worried about the problem of the room being dirty. Generally speaking, people who had pets at home, especially people like Zhonghai who had a lot of pets, the atmosphere in the house was definitely not very good, but Little Yellow and Little White knew to go to the toilet, and they also knew to take a bath in the river if they had nothing to do. Therefore their bodies did not smell, but it was inevitable that their fur would fall out in the room. This was the most annoying thing for people who had dogs and cats. Animals would always lose their fur, just like how people lose their hair. But since Daliana and Marian began to clean the room, Hai almost did not see any animal's fur. In the past, Xueqi was not allowed to go out of the room. She could only come out after sunset. Usually, her only friend was Bernice. Later, with Hai, Daliana, and Marian, Xueqi had 3 more friends. Recently, Xiaoya's illness was getting better and better. Other than at noon, she could even go out to soak in the hot spring. As her range of activities grew larger and larger, her heart also gradually opened up. At this time, in addition to being in charge of Hai's breakfast, lunch and dinner, she was also the chef, with Daliana and Marian as her assistants. At the same time, she also began to learn how to clean, although she looked a little clumsy now. Looking at the 3 girls in front of him, Hai didn't disturb them. Instead, he deliberately went around them and returned to his room. After arriving at his room, Little Yellow, Little White, and Braid weren't in the room. During the day, it was very rare to see these 3 guys. Only Xueqi was standing on the windowsill, looking at the sky outside with a confused expression. Ah! Seeing its appearance, Hai was stunned for a moment, then he walked to Chirp's side. Perhaps feeling the arrival of Hai, Chirps turned its head and glanced at Hai, then flapped its wings, and finally jumped into the room. It walked in front of Hai and looked up at him. "You want to fly?" Looking at Chirp's slightly confused eyes, Hai couldn't help but scratch his head awkwardly. A long time ago, Hai had wanted to teach Chirps how to fly, but later on, he forgot about it. He always forgot about Chirps wanting to fly. Now looking at Chirps, although it hasn't reached the level of maturity, it's not small, but it still can't fly. Chirps squatted down and said to itself. The bald-head sea eagle, the king of the sky, opened its mouth and looked at Hai with its big eyes. Looking at its eyes, Hai, who was originally a little tired, temporarily forgot about his physical fatigue. "Okay, let's study it and see how to make you fly." Hearing Chirp's words, Hai also nodded. Then he lifted Chirps with one hand and walked in front of his computer. He has to think of a way. Chirps grabbed Hai's arm and didn't move, just quietly looking at Hai. Eagles are different from other animals. Mammals are much smarter, like Xiaobai, Xiaohuang, and front teeth. When these guys face Hai, they will take the initiative to make some movements to let Hai know that they can understand Hai's words. But eagles are different. Birds have small brains. Chirps is standing here now, and Hai doesn't know if it can understand, but as long as it is obedient, it might be able to understand his words. Turning on his computer, Hai began to search for ways to teach eagles to fly, but unfortunately, there are no such tutorials online. Then Hai also looked up some information. It turns out that if these birds are thrown down from a high place, the chances of the birds learning to fly are very low, and most of them fall to their deaths. Eagles, and all other birds, in fact, originated from imitation. They learn the movements of their parents, and after mastering all the essentials of the movements, the mother will kick these little guys down trees or cliffs, because they know that when the essentials of learning, coupled with the things deeply imprinted in their genes, all play a role, they will learn to fly. But the problem now is that Chirps doesn't have parents. Moreover, Hai can't fly, so he can't teach it even if he wants to. After thinking about it, Hai decided to give it a try. So he began to look for videos of bald eagles on the internet. There are still a lot of these videos. When the video first started playing, Chirps was obviously stunned because it has never seen another bald eagle in its life. One had to know that the bald-head sea eagle was not a social creature. This bird had its own territory. Seeing that there is a new bald eagle, Chirps didn't show any affection. Instead, it opened its wings and screamed at the video. Hai has been watching its reaction. When he saw it like this, Hai couldn't help but frown. "Chirps, calm down, calm down." Hai stroked Xueqi's feathers and said loudly to it. Xueqi might have heard Hai's words, but it couldn't help but turn its head and look at Hai. At the same time, it was also on guard against the white-headed sea eagle. "Cough, this is fake, you have to learn its posture." Seeing that Chirps calmed down, Hai said to it after a while. Hearing Hai's words, Chirps didn't want to learn. Instead, it tilted its head. It has to be admitted that such a tilted head is still very effective on Hai. It's almost like a question mark is drawn on its head. "You don't understand? God, what should I do?" Looking at Xueqi's appearance, Hai smiled helplessly. It seems that this method is not very good. After hesitating, Jiang Hai asked it tentatively, but it was still the same. Even if Jiang Hai tried to imitate the appearance of the bald eagle in the video, Xueqi still had a silly expression. In the end, Jiang Hai was also a little speechless. He pulled its wings with his hand and pretended to fly. Although Chirps didn't resist, it obviously didn't understand why Jiang Hai did this. Looking at it, Jiang Hai was also speechless. Real knowledge comes from practice. Let's try to fly. When Jiang Hai and Chirps fiddled in the room for 2 hours, Jiang Hai gave up. He was going to take it outside and try to see if it could fly. Chapter 528. Hey Jiang Hai, what are you going to do? After watching Jiang Hai stay in his room for 2 hours, he still wore his original clothes and walked out with an eagle. This made Delina, Marian and little Ya, who had finished cleaning and were preparing to cook dinner, and Bernice, who had returned to the sofa in the room, felt very strange. Seeing Jiang Hai going out, Bernice couldn't help but ask with some doubts. I'm going to let this guy fly. Hearing Bernice's words, Jiang Hai smiled and pointed to Chirps beside him. Hey! Can this little free-range chicken fly? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Bernice's eyes lit up and she said with excitement. Young bald eagles were indeed ugly. They had gray feathers and were bald. They looked like a chicken that had lost its feathers. But when Bernice came, Chirps was already almost fully grown. This was because of the infusion of Jiang Hai's spiritual energy. Chirps, which originally needed several years to grow up, was now no smaller than an adult bald-head sea eagle under Jiang Hai's feeding. Of course, if he were to fight with an adult bald-head sea eagle, 10 of him wouldn't be able to beat one of them. However, his appearance was still very intimidating. As for why Bernice called Chirps free-range chicken, there is a story behind it. When Bernice first moved here, although she came to the United States very early, she had never seen a creature like bald eagle up close before, so after seeing Chirps in Jiang Hai's room, she was very curious. So she quietly fed it a lot of things and let it cooperate with her to take photos. But Chirps was used to being fed, and it was not much bigger than it was at that time. When it was hungry at night, it went to Bernice for food. Bernice happened to be taking a bath, but her body was stained with the smell of beef from when she fed Chirps. So Chirps went to rummage and accidentally let Bernice's vest hang on its claws. When Bernice came out, she saw Chirps rummaging in her clothes. She was anxious and ran over. After all, Chirps was still young. If you chased, it could only run. So one person and one bird staged a space chase in the villa. Although Jiang Hai was quarreled at that time, it was not easy for him to make a move. After all, there were some things that were scratched. Cough. Later, it was Delina and Marian who helped to catch Chirps to settle this matter. But since then, the next day, Bernice began to call Chirps free-range chicken, which could be regarded as belittling it. But unfortunately, Chirps didn't seem to understand what she was saying, but it didn't ask her for food. Hearing that Jiang Hai was going to release Chirps, Bernice froze for a moment. Then she immediately stood up and went to Chirps' side. She opened Chirps' wings to take a look. In any case, Chirps' wings were longer than Bernice's arm. Bernice wasn't short, she was more than 170 meters tall, which was quite tall among women. Her arm span was about the same as her height, so her arm span was about 170 meters, although she wasn't close to Chirps. But from her gestures, it was obvious that Xueqi's wings were much longer than her hands. Moreover, they were not completely straight. Xueqi's wingspan was at least 9 meters. An adult bald-headed sea eagle was only 1.8 to 2 meters. Now Chirps' wingspan was 9 meters, which was already longer than the average bald-headed sea eagle. If those experts knew that this bald-headed sea eagle was only 1 year old, what would they think? Wow, it's enough to fly. Looking at Chirps' wingspan, Bernice exclaimed excitedly. Jiang Hai also walked out with Chirps, followed by Bernice, Daliana, Marian, and little Ya. They were very interested in releasing Chirps. After walking to the courtyard, Jiang Hai shouted, "Fly, my brave warrior!" Then he threw Chirps out, but Chirps flapped its wings a few times in the air as Jiang Hai expected. Unfortunately, it was a complete failure. Chirps didn't fly at all. It didn't even glide. It was just like a chicken. After a few flaps in the air, it fell to the ground in front of it, flapping its wings and crying loudly. Ah! Looking at Xueqi's appearance, Jiang Hai and Bernice felt as if a crow had flown over their heads. What the hell is this? Is this a bald eagle disguised as a chicken, or a chicken disguised as a bald eagle? Fortunately, Jiang Hai just stood on the ground and threw it. If he stood at a higher place, wouldn't it fall to the ground? Looking at Chirps, who might be in pain and had been screaming, Jiang Hai scratched his head and walked to its side. When it saw Jiang Hai, there was a trace of vigilance in its eyes. Its loyalty was 100%, and it would not be afraid of Jiang Hai. However, it still looked at Jiang Hai very vigilantly. It wanted to know if this guy was going to throw it again. Cough. Let's try again. Looking at Chirp's eyes, Jiang Hai said a little awkwardly, and then gestured. But as soon as his voice fell, Chirps had already screamed and wanted to run away. But unfortunately, it was not as fast as Jiang Hai. It was directly caught in Jiang Hai's hand, but it has been struggling in Jiang Hai's hand. It seems that it doesn't want to fly again. It knows that it was its fault before. It shouldn't have tried to fly. It was just a chicken. Don't throw it again. But unfortunately, Jiang Hai didn't understand its meaning and continued to walk back to the courtyard. Hey, boss, are you going to eat it? At this moment, suddenly, a car drove over from a distance. The person in the car was none other than Edward Anderson. At this time, there was a small water tank behind his car. It was filled with the lobsters and other things that were caught today. It was to be sold to the tourists waiting outside. Are you kidding me? I want it to fly. Rolling his eyes at Edward Anderson, how can Jiang Hai eat bald eagle in the territory of the United States? Although he hasn't eaten it, cough, even if he eats it, he won't eat Chirps. You want it to fly? Oh, I didn't even notice it. This little guy has grown so big without me noticing? Well, it should indeed fly. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Edward Anderson also became interested. He got out of the car and picked up Chirp's wings to take a look. With such a big pair of wings, it can indeed fly. How is it going? Looking at its appearance, it doesn't seem to be making good progress. Looking at Jiang Hai, Edward Anderson asked with some doubts. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also nodded helplessly. Indeed, the progress is not very good. Then he told Edward Anderson about his situation just now, including how after he threw Chirps out, it didn't do anything and fell directly. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Edward Anderson also grinned. If it's about fish, then he will definitely not pass on his responsibility, but if it's about birds, he really doesn't understand. In fact, it's not only him who doesn't understand, probably no one in the entire manor will understand. Just as they were studying there, the people in the manor also came back one after another, including Robbins Garcia and the others. They all surrounded Chirps, and everyone was thinking of a solution. Unfortunately, the solution they came up with was similar to Jiang Hai's. They were all useless. Chirps was also a little scared of being surrounded by so many people, and it looked at these people with vigilance. Boss, I'm sorry, I can't help. After hesitating for a moment, Edward Anderson was the first to say, somewhat speechless. Forget it. You'd better go sell your lobsters. Everyone can go back. I'll study it slowly. With a sigh, Jiang Hai said to Edward Anderson, and then looked at Chirps in his hand speechlessly. How to make it fly is indeed a headache. And after hearing Jiang Hai's words, everyone went back to what they were supposed to do. Jiang, do you still remember the place where we went to catch dogs together? But just as he was about to leave, Robbins Garcia suddenly stopped and looked at Jiang Hai with a serious face. Of course I remember the stray pet center, I donated a lot of money there. Why are you mentioning it? Hearing Robbins Garcia's words, Jiang Hai looked at him strangely and asked. I remember that in addition to dogs, there seem to be a lot of other animals there, including birds of prey. The people there may have a way to make Chirps fly. Robbins Garcia said seriously when he heard that Jiang Hai still remembered the place. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai's eyes lit up. Indeed, there are some things that he may not be able to do, but those experts may not be able to do it. Thinking of this, he couldn't wait to drive to town immediately, but he knew that the stray pet center in town was already closed at this time, and no one would pay attention to him even if he went there. It's better to wait until tomorrow. Let's ask the experts tomorrow. Patting Chirp's head, Jiang Hai put it back on the ground. When Chirp's feet touched the ground, it ran away quickly like a chicken. It was really afraid that Jiang Hai would call it over again and throw it high up, although it was not broken just now. However, The hard fall had hurt it a lot. It did not want to experience it again. Looking at Chirp's appearance, Zhang Hai couldn't help but shake his head. The battlefield of raptors belongs to the sky, not the ground. Anyway, he has nothing to do recently, so no matter what, he must teach Chirps to fly. Looking at Zhang Hai's serious gaze, Daliana and Marian looked at each other. They were going to give Chirps more food at night because they knew that whenever Zhang Hai showed such a gaze, it meant that whatever he was looking at would definitely not have a good ending. Chapter 529. Zhang Hai was the kind of person who would not be able to sleep well at night if he had something on his mind. After deciding to let Xueqi fly, he took a good bath that night. Of course, he went to the hot spring to soak. Then he went to bed early. The next morning, after running one lap and eating breakfast, he left the manor with Xueqi before 9 o'clock in the morning and went to the homeless pet center in Winthrop. When he entered the town, many tourists had already woken up and were standing in various corners of the town, taking photos and showing off their feelings at this moment with their friends in China. Many people took the initiative to greet Zhang Hai after seeing Zhang Hai's war shield. Zhang Hai also lowered the window and exchanged a few words with them. Although Zhang Hai did not know them at all, it did not prevent Zhang Hai from being polite. After all, to some extent, these people were his compatriots and guests. Although Zhang Hai walked and stopped, he still arrived at the homeless pet center in Winthrop before 9:30. When he stopped the car, a girl who was cleaning up happened to see him. Seeing Zhang Hai's stylish car arrive, the girl looked at Zhang Hai with interest and said, "It's you, what's the matter?" This girl had some fate with Zhang Hai. The two had met twice. The first time was when Zhang Hai came to choose dogs. Zhang Hai chose Xiaobai, Little Huang, and a few shepherd dogs. To be honest, those shepherd dogs were quite powerful. The second time was after he caught the mountain lion for the first time. When he sent the mountain lion over, he saw this girl. This was the third time they met, but obviously, this girl who looked good was more than 170 meters tall and had some small freckles on her face. She did not have a good impression of Zhang Hai. "What, are you going to adopt my brown bear again?" Seeing Zhang Hai walk down, the girl said with a proud face. That's a digression. I'm not here to raise brown bears this time. I really have something to trouble you with." Hearing the words of this little beauty, Zhang Hai smiled, then looked at her with a serious expression and said, "Say it, what's the matter?" Hearing Zhang Hai say that he had something to trouble them with, the girl crossed her arms and asked doubtfully. "It's like this," Zhang Hai said as he took Xueqi out of the co-pilot seat. At the sight of the raptor standing on Zhang Hai's arm, the girl's eyes lit up at once. She knew that Zhang Hai had a white-headed sea eagle. The Winthrop Town Police Department had already reported to them, and they were the ones who approved it. Otherwise, the symbol of the United States would not be so easily raised by others, even if this person was the richest man in Winthrop. But she did not think that Zhang Hai would raise this little guy so well. It was almost the same size as an adult white-headed sea eagle. She didn't know how big it was when Zhang Hai raised it. But looking at it now, it wasn't small at all. But when she heard that this little guy could not fly yet, she could not help but smile. In fact, this was quite normal. It was not the first time she encountered such a thing. Generally speaking, this kind of raptor could not fly when they were born. Because these raptors with a long growth cycle, just like humans, needed time to build a foundation and grow. For example, deer could run not long after they were born, and rats could dig holes not long after they were born, but these creatures have a very short growth cycle. Naturally, they are not high-level animals at the top of the food chain. Raptors such as white-headed sea eagle, golden eagle, and other raptors all need a learning process, and this learning process is basically guided by their parents. However, this little guy grew up with humans. Naturally, these little guys who grew up with humans do not know how to fly, which is understandable. But understanding is understanding, but there is nothing she can do about it. "Sorry, we don't have any way. We are just from the Animal Rescue Center, not the Animal Research Center, so we don't know how to solve your problem." Hearing Zhang Hai's words, the girl told the truth. That's a pity." Hearing that the girl could not help him, Zhang Hai sighed and touched Xueqi's head beside him. Could it be that this guy has no way to fly? That's really a trap. To be honest, this kind of raptor is very wild. Now you want to let it fly. After it learns to fly, it may not stay. Looking at Zhang Hai's slightly tangled look, the girl walked to Xueqi's side, scratched Xueqi's huge claws, and then looked at Zhang Hai and said, she didn't believe that Zhang Hai really didn't care. Haha, it's my fortune to get it, it's my fate to lose it. It's not a big deal, but if I don't let such a raptor fly in the sky, I always feel a little sorry for it. If it really learns to fly and leaves, I don't care. I'll just let it go. Hearing the girl's words, Zhang Hai smiled freely. Indeed, he doesn't care about this. Because of his aura, even if he lets Xueqi fly, it will definitely not leave him. This is also his confidence. Do you really think so? Hearing Zhang Hai's words, the girl was stunned for a moment. She didn't expect Zhang Hai to be so free and easy. This is a bald sea eagle. If he wants to sell it, it will be very expensive. But after she finished speaking, she couldn't help but laugh because she seemed to have put herself in Zhang Hai's shoes. She forgot that the young man in front of her is different from her. He is not an ordinary person, but a super rich man, a young billionaire. Perhaps in the eyes of an average family, the bald eagle is a bundle of green dollar bills, but in Zhang Hai's eyes, it's just a bird. It seems that he was being a little too careful, gauging the heart of a gentleman. Since you don't know, then I'm sorry to bother you. I have to think of other ways. Hearing that the girl had no idea, Zhang Hai couldn't help but think of his research center in Boston. He didn't know if they had any ideas. Actually, if you really don't care about letting it fly, I have a way. You might be able to try it. But just as Zhang Hai was about to leave, the girl suddenly stopped Zhang Hai, and then said with a little hesitation, "Oh, what do you mean?" Hearing her words, Zhang Hai couldn't help but look at her and asked strangely. In fact, these birds can't fly. The main thing is that they need a guide. If you can find a similar bird for it and let it imitate it, maybe it will be able to fly. Looking at Zhang Hai, the girl said with a serious face. Hearing her words, Zhang Hai thought for a moment. It seems, probably, that makes some sense. No matter what kind of creature it was, at the very beginning, it was natural to imitate. Children imitated adults, cubs imitated beasts, and birds naturally imitated birds. If they really found a big bird to teach Xueqi, it might really be able to fly. Where can I find a white-headed sea eagle now? Looking at the girl in front of him, Zhang Hai asked excitedly. I have a classmate who is now a veterinarian in the Boston Zoo. Maybe he can help. Looking at Zhang Hai's excited look, the girl also smiled, and then said to Zhang Hai. Hearing that the girl had resources, Zhang Hai immediately pulled the girl into the car. As long as Xueqi can learn to fly, he is willing to donate some money. And the girl looked at Zhang Hai's eager look, smiled, sat next to Zhang Hai and told him to go to the Boston Zoo. There were 2 zoos in Boston. In fact, it was quite famous because a movie was shot here a few years ago. It was called Zookeeper, which translated to Zookeeper. It was about a fat man with a good heart who was a breeder in the zoo. But because this job was not good, he was dumped by his girlfriend, so he was going to change jobs. At this time, the animals in the zoo could talk and give him ideas. It was a comedy, and Zhang Hai had also seen it. But he really didn't think that it was shot in the Boston Zoo. Zhang Hai often went to the zoo when he was young, but he really didn't go there when he grew up. There were 2 zoos in Boston. The smaller one in the suburbs was called Stone Zoo. The tickets were not expensive, and they were discounted on non-Saturday, Sunday, or holidays. Basically, the price was about $13 a ticket all year round. But this was not Zhang Hai's destination. They were going to the bigger zoo called Franklin Zoo, and most of the scenes in the movie were shot here. Speaking of this zoo, it was very famous. After all, Boston was definitely one of the oldest cities in the United States, so there was a zoo here a long time ago. This Franklin Zoo was opened in 1912. It covered an area of 72 acres, which was about 0.3 square kilometers, in the north of Boston's Franklin Park. There were more than 220 species, and it was home to more than 1,000 animals. Although the park was not particularly big, it was divided into many scenic spots. The tropical rainforest, the Serengeti Prairie, the Kalahari Desert Kingdom, the Giraffe Prairie, the Bird World, the Butterfly World, the Tiger World, the African Wild Dog World, the Children's Zoo, and so on. Almost all the common animals here were here. Of course, there were no pandas. There were only a few famous pandas in the United States, and that was it. The most famous thing here was the Bird World, because the bird world here was divided into 4 major living areas: swamps, rainforests, deserts, and wetlands. A variety of environments created different bird habitats. In the whole of Boston, this place was very famous. At least, many children liked to come here to play. Chapter 5:30. We've known each other for a long time, but I still don't know your name. Looking at the girl sitting next to him teasing Xueqi, Zhang Hai thought for a while, then braced himself and asked. After all, he can't not call this girl's name. He and this girl have known each other for a long time. They have met 3 times, but he still doesn't know her name. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, the girl here also reacted. She knows what Zhang Hai's name is. After all, his reputation is very famous in the town, but she ignored the fact that Zhang Hai doesn't know her name. Then let me introduce myself. My name is Domenica Xueqi, 26 years old this year, and I am now a doctor at the Stray Pet Rescue Center in Winthrop Town. Hearing that Zhang Hai wants to know her name, the girl also looked at Zhang Hai seriously and said, "Oh, my name is Zhang Hai, a nouveau riche." Hearing her words, Zhang Hai also introduced himself with a smile. Hee, who says they are nouveau riche? Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Dominica couldn't help but roll her eyes at Zhang Hai. Hey, I've heard a lot of people call me that. But fortunately, the nouveau riche is a very good word in my mind. The sentence I want to say the most in my life is, I have nothing but money. The sentence I want to hear the most is, what do you have but money? The person I want to make the most doesn't have to look at his net worth at all, because no one has more money than me. Shrugging, Zhang Hai said with a smile. Hearing Zhang Hai's half-humorous and half-self-deprecating words, Dominica on the other side also laughed. You are making me laugh like this. Do you want to hit on me? But after laughing, Dominica looked at Zhang Hai and said with amusement. Seeing her raise her eyebrows, Zhang Hai pursed his lips. To be honest, he didn't have such thoughts. But now that the girl said it, if Zhang Hai said no, wouldn't it be too fake? Let me tell you, it's not easy to flirt with me. All right, we're almost there. Seeing Zhang Hai's expression, Dominica smiled and patted Zhang Hai's shoulder, indicating that they had arrived. When the car arrived at the entrance of the exhibition hall, Zhang Hai took the initiative to buy the tickets. After driving the car into the parking lot, he got out of the car with Xueqi and Dominica. When they got out of the car, Zhang Hai immediately received a lot of attention. After all, there was a white-headed sea eagle standing on his arm. For a moment, all eyes were on him. But no one came over to say anything. After all, they didn't know what was going on with Zhang Hai's bird. Before they attracted the crowd, Dominica had already walked into the zoo with Zhang Hai. She casually found a keeper here and asked about the person she was looking for this time. Yes, Dominica came here to look for someone. After all, she said that she wanted to find a teacher for Xueqi. She was a veterinarian in Winthrop Town. In the Franklin Zoo, she had no influence. So this time, she was looking for a college classmate of hers, a man who was a veterinarian here. Soon they found him. When they walked to a place called Rare Animal Research Hall, a white man had been waiting in front of the exhibition hall for a long time. When he saw Dominica coming, there was a clear look of excitement on his face, but when he saw Zhang Hai, there was a hint of hostility in his eyes. It seemed that Zhang Hai was his imaginary rival in love. For such a popular man, people see him as a thorn in the flesh wherever he goes. Zhang Hai also said that he was used to it, but Dominica didn't notice this. When she saw the man, she smiled and greeted him. Hi John, how have you been? Dominica said with a smile after hugging the man named John. There was no other way. In the United States there were too many people called John and George. Zhang Hai could only complain a little. Oh, I'm fine. Recently, I've been studying the biological engineering of adding DNA chromosomes. This may allow us to change the habits of some animals. The research was progressing well, but my old classmate is here, so I must come and accompany him. Looking at Dominica, the man named John said with a slight accent. Listening to the messy academic knowledge in his mouth, Dominica showed a look of surprise, as if it was amazing, but for Zhang Hai, he didn't know what the hell it was. In fact, the things he learned in high school and college were almost useless to Zhang Hai. Calculus, advanced mathematics, what's the use of learning? He won't be able to use it in his life. But I don't think these birds of prey should be raised by humans. Well, buddy, don't be sad. I'm not targeting you. Let's go in. After exchanging a few words with Dominique, the man looked at the bald eagle standing on Zhang Hai's arm and sighed with admiration. To be honest, Chirp was really scary, especially from the front. It looked quite fierce. And while this man was praising Xueqi, he didn't forget to target Zhang Hai. Well, he was targeting Zhang Hai. However, he didn't give Zhang Hai time to fight back. After he finished speaking, he walked directly inside, and Zhang Hai also smiled. Not to mention that he was asking for help now. Even if he didn't ask this guy for help, he wouldn't become enemies with others because of this sentence. Sometimes, his heart was surprisingly small, but sometimes, it would be slightly open. At the very least, it would not be so upfront. Following the man into the rare animal museum next to him, Zhang Hai couldn't help but exclaim in surprise as soon as he walked in. This rare animal museum didn't look big, but it was actually not small inside. Not only was there an area for birds, fish, and beasts, but the number of animal species was also much more than in the zoo outside. For example, Zhang Hai's first step was in the amphibian animal area. Looking around, there were many crocodiles on both sides. This is the largest rare animal area on our east coast. It contains all the rare animals in the Washington Convention. Of course, there are some rare animals with national characteristics, but the number is basically the same. Probably because he heard Zhang Hai's praise, this homebody guy's vanity instantly exploded. He deliberately slowed down a little and started talking to Zhang Hai. Look at these. This is the crocodile family, a type of crocodile. The poplar crocodile belongs to this category, belonging to small crocodiles. This is the Central American alligator. This is the southern alligator. This is the Amazon crocodile, black caiman crocodile. This is the crocodile family. This is the narrow snout crocodile. This is the sharp snout crocodile. What a beautiful little guy. This is the intermediate crocodile, the Philippine crocodile, the Gulf crocodile, the alligator, the Nile crocodile. Looking at Zhang Hai's curious eyes, he also introduced these crocodiles. Almost all the crocodiles in the world are protected by the Washington Convention, but there is no poplar crocodile here. After walking through dozens and hundreds of crocodiles in the area, there were still some amphibians, but this time, it was replaced by the modern dinosaur lizard family, which was similar to crocodiles. Almost 90% of the lizard species were protected species. Chameleon family, clubbed lizard family, gecko family, venomous lizard family, iguana family, and so on. However, among the skinks that Zhang Hai caught, only the lomenes was a protected species. The others were not. This was good news. And what Zhang Hai liked the most was the giant lizard family. The guys in this family were really scary. Especially the Komodo dragon. There were two here. Looking at the fat guy's appearance, Zhang Hai really wanted to raise them. Think about it. Zhang Hai could even raise a mountain lion. If he raised these things, would he really raise dinosaurs? Zhang Hai didn't know if it would happen, but he knew that these things were not so easy to get. After the lizards, it was the snake family. The first species was the snake family, which was the largest snake we were familiar with. Before coming here, Zhang Hai had always thought that the snake was actually similar to the python, but after coming here, he knew that it was a different subject. All the snakes in the snake family were protected species. So was the python family. In addition, there were the thunder snake family, swimming snake family, cobra family, flickering snake family, viper family, and so on. After snakes, there were turtles, all the species of sea turtles, snapping turtles, leatherback turtles, and so on. Even the turtle was actually a protected species. Zhang Hai really didn't know before. Just the amphibians at the beginning were already an eye-opener for Zhang Hai. He had to admit that it was much more fun here than in the zoo. On the other hand, John seemed to have learned from Domenica that Zhang Hai was a rich man and had nothing to do with her. This made the hostility in his eyes lessen a lot, and he happily introduced all the creatures here to Zhang Hai. After walking past these animals, there were many animals behind. There were many protected species of frogs in the toad family, as well as poison dart frogs, bats, spiders, giant salamanders, and so on. These were all protected species in the Washington Convention. Before Zhang Hai came, he really didn't know that there were so many species that were protected. In the past, when he watched TV at home, he didn't know what these animals were. Unknowingly, they also walked past the area of insects and amphibians in front of them, and then entered a world of water. He didn't know if it was because of the Dragon Ball in Zhang Hai's body, but Zhang Hai naturally had a good impression of water. After seeing the marine world in front of him, Zhang Hai's body, which was still a little hot, also cooled down a lot. The protected species in fish were not less than that of terrestrial animals. Zhang Hai knew more about these fish than terrestrial animals. For example, the rippled lip fish in front of him at this time was a protected species in the Washington Convention. He had introduced it before, but when he continued to walk, he couldn't help but be surprised. Were these fish also a protected species? Chapter 531. Hey John, this fish is arowana. Looking at the fish swimming in the fish tank in front of him, Zhang Hai asked with some uncertainty. Because the fish in front of him at this time indeed looked like arowana, and it's a relatively expensive species. When Zhang Hai was in high school, his family raised fish for a while. Of course, they didn't raise expensive species like the arowana, but some small fish. At that time, his father didn't know who influenced him, but he began to like raising fish. At first, he only raised some small fish like phoenixes, traffic lights, submarines, and so on. Later, he felt that small fish were boring. He started raising maps, then arhats, then parrots, and finally fish for a while. In the end, these fish all died, but they accompanied Zhang Hai for a long time. It wasn't until after he graduated from college that his father gave up raising fish because the fish tank in the house was broken. However, Zhang Hai had followed his father to the fish market since he was a child to buy fish. He still has some understanding of fish. At least, he knows that arowana is the most expensive fish in the aquarium market. But aren't these arowana ornamental fish? Why does the Washington Convention protect this fish? Oh, I heard that this fish is indeed called arowana in Huaxia, but here, this fish is called beautiful hardened bone-tongue fish, which is a variant of bone-tongue fish. It is indeed a protected species in the Washington Convention. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, John also introduced it. Looking at the few big fish in front of him, Zhang Hai also lay there and looked at them. This fish is indeed very beautiful, but its research value is not too high because it is found all over the world. Seeing that Zhang Hai seems to be very interested in this fish, John also came over and explained to Zhang Hai. Arowana, also known as beautiful hardened bone-tongue fish. Well, this scientific name is not as comfortable as arowana. This fish is a very ancient species of fish, which can be traced back to the Carboniferous period of the Archean era 360 million years ago. At that time, this kind of fish had already existed, and was comparable to the ancestors of sharks. 140 million years ago, this kind of fish was mainly found in Asia and the Indian subcontinent. But with the division of Pango continent and the movement of the Earth's crust, this kind of fish had spread all over the world. In 1829, this kind of fish was first discovered in the Amazon, but they were white and golden. The most expensive blood dragon was discovered in South Vietnam in 1933. Other than that, arowana was found in Asia, Sumatra, Bangka, Borneo, Thailand, and other places. Later, people gradually divided these arowana into several types. Arowana, arowana, silver, arowana, arowana, and white arowana were the cheapest ones. Of them, of course of arowana white and white. Of course of Burmese, of Burmese, of Burmese. This kind of Burmese python was different. The probability of albinism in the golden python was very high, especially in the case of artificial cultivation. However, these arowana could only be found by chance. According to John, there was also a Chinese man here. According to the Chinese man, the arowana here could be found in almost any quality. After all, this was Boston, and the United States was the leader of the world. He wanted to collect some rare species of fish from all over the world in his aquarium. Very few people would refuse to give them face, so the arowana here could be said to have all kinds of arowana. Apart from the silver arowana, there were also gold arowana, red arowana, chili arowana, and even golden arowana. If these fish were sold in Huaxia, the price would be very high. However, although there were many people in the United States who raised fish, they really didn't sell them at a high price. Anyway, I can't tell what's so good about this fish, John said, curling his lips as he leaned against the glass and looked at the fish in front of him. Hee hee. Hearing his words, Zhang Hai also laughed. A person's aesthetic couldn't be forcefully changed. John didn't think the fish looked good, so Zhang Hai didn't have much to say. However, after listening to his introduction, Zhang Hai was a little tempted. He used to like raising fish when he was with his father. However, after he went to university, he didn't live at home, and the dormitory didn't allow him to raise fish. Zhang Hai didn't mind. Although he raised a lot of fish now, he had never raised ornamental fish before. Most importantly, from the sound of it, this fish seemed to be worth a lot of money. A platinum arowana was worth $300,000, which was much more expensive than a big bluefin golden spear. Unless it was at the level of the kingfish, a bluefin golden spear might not be able to sell for $30,000, let alone $300,000. It seemed that raising this fish was also a way to make a fortune. Of course, platinum arowana couldn't be raised by raising them. This type of dragonfish was extremely rare. According to John, there were two types of platinum arowana. One was the snow dragon, and the other was the platinum dragon. Of course, the price of the two types of fish was about the same. The snow dragon was a mutation of the silver dragon, while the platinum dragon was a mutation of other arowana. However, there were very few fish that could mutate. According to some people, there might not even be 1 in a million fish that could mutate. In other words, the probability of mutating was 1 in a million. Well, that was almost the same as 0. Arowana produced a lot of offspring. Although they took 5 to 6 years to mature, or even more than 10 years, each time they laid eggs, they would give birth to a lot of arowana. These arowana were carefully taken care of here, and they weren't sold here. Therefore, there were a lot of arowana here. However, there were so many arowana here, and none of them were white. Most importantly, even if he used the offspring of 2 platinum dragons, it wouldn't be of any use. They wouldn't be able to produce offspring. The success rate didn't increase by much, and Zhang Hai couldn't do anything about it except sweat. However, if he used spiritual energy to cultivate them, there might be a chance that they would become like this. Even if he couldn't get a white breed, it was inevitable that they would grow big and beautiful. The Americans didn't think of selling these fish in Huaxia, but Zhang Hai could. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but look at John. By the way, John, I'm very interested in these fish. Can you see if you can get me a few? Money isn't a problem. Looking at John, Zhang Hai looked at him with a burning gaze. Then, he lowered his voice and said to him. However, although his voice was low, Dominica still heard it. She couldn't help but mutter in her heart. Here we go again. Zhang Hai really couldn't change his habit of eating fish. No matter where he went, he wanted to get these things. He wanted to raise their brown bear, and now he wants to raise fish. But this time, she didn't scold Zhang Hai, because the number of this kind of fish was not too small. The wild ones were naturally very precious, but the non-wild ones could be artificially farmed. It was just that the survival rate was slightly lower. It was still far from being extinct. Therefore, she didn't care that Zhang Hai wanted to raise this fish. Instead, she looked at the dolphins next to her. This kind of thing should be left to Zhang Hai and John to discuss. After hearing Zhang Hai's words, John couldn't help but frown slightly. If Zhang Hai wanted to buy other fish, he would have been angry a long time ago. But this kind of arowana wasn't very valuable. It was placed here to increase the number of fish species. Now that Zhang Hai wanted to buy it, he didn't know what to say. We definitely won't sell it to you, but if you donate some money, we might give you some as a gift. After thinking for a while, he naturally couldn't directly buy something from the American government, but if he donated money and gave it to them as a gift, then it would be fine. Of course, he wouldn't be able to take the money donated. The fish would be donated to the zoo. Although it was just a different way of saying bye, it was much better in the eyes of outsiders. After hearing his words, Zhang Hai also smiled. Sure enough, this wasn't a difficult thing. In the United States, there were very few things that money couldn't do. He immediately agreed to donate $100,000. Of course, the fish he wanted was definitely worth more than $100,000. Hearing that Zhang Hai was so generous, John was obviously very happy and was even more enthusiastic about Zhang Hai. He was even asking what species Zhang Hai wanted and how many fish he wanted. Zhang Hai just smiled. He hadn't even bought a fish tank yet, so there was no point in being so anxious. Besides, he wasn't here to buy fish. After chatting with John for a while, Zhang Hai continued to follow him. After passing through the aquatic animal area, it was the terrestrial animal area. The terrestrial animals here were all protected. Zhang Hai even saw a Siberian tiger here. Of course, the Siberian tiger wasn't native here. It was only from the northeast of Huaxia and the Siberian region of Soviet Russia. It was the largest cat in the world. But now it did look smaller than the mountain lion. No matter what, it was still the strongest cat. Zhang Hai wasn't surprised to see this guy here. After all, there weren't many species in North America. This was something everyone knew. After the European colonists landed on the American continent, the species here were almost extinct. For example, large cats and the like were rarely seen here. After passing the terrestrial animal area, they came to the bird area. This area was very large and there were all kinds of birds. Some small birds were just in some natural cages, while some big birds occupied a forest by themselves. When they came to the largest forest here, John and the others stopped because they had arrived. Looking at the artificial forest in front of him, Zhang Hai also looked up. Sure enough, following his gaze, Zhang Hai also looked up. In this forest, several black figures were standing on the treetops at this time. Several pairs of fierce eyes were staring at Zhang Hai and the others. Chapter 532. This is the bald-head sea eagle's breeding area. Standing outside the area, Hardadef said emotionally. After all, this is the national bird of the United States. The treatment is indeed different. Glancing at the small cages in the distance, and then looking at the small forest in front of him, Zhang Hai shrugged. The difference in treatment is really obvious. Oh, there is no absolute fairness anywhere, let alone in nature. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Dominika also said with a smile. Zhang Hai naturally understood what she meant. In this world where everything has to be paid attention to harmony and reason, people are not equal, let alone in the natural world where the strong preys on the weak. Hearing her words, Zhang Hai just smiled and then casually touched Xueqi beside him. Martha. At this time, Hardadef also opened the cage and walked in with Zhang Hai and the others. He then put on a leather protective gear to protect his arms. After raising his arms to the sky, he shouted loudly. As his voice sounded, a figure flashed, and in the next second, a huge bald eagle also flashed from the forest and steadily landed on his piece of skin. The claws of the bald eagle are no joke. You must know that there is nothing they don't eat when they reach adulthood. Wild boars, deer, fish, and even carnivores, they will eat them all. And this pair of claws is the treasure of these guys. Not only are the claws extremely sharp, but they are also very powerful. If you don't put a piece of skin on your arm, it's easy for these guys to scratch your arm. But even so, when this huge bald eagle landed on John's arm, it still knocked him back a few steps. After a while, he recovered, then slowly walked towards Zhang Hai and the others. But just as he walked over, Chirps on Zhang Hai's arm was already nervous, looking at this guy with a vigilant face. Just like when he watched TV at home, he would be nervous. Not to mention now seeing the other party with his own eyes. But compared to the immature Chirp, this big bird called Martha didn't do anything and just stared at it. This is Martha, a 3-year-old female eagle. Her father was shot to death when she was young, and her mother was scared away. We only found her. She grew up here. Later we taught her how to fly. Now, she is also the head eagle here. The flying skills of those little eagles are taught by her. Seeing Martha on his arm, Hardadef introduced her with a smile. Although the bald sea eagle existed alone in the natural world, each had their own territory. However, this wasn't the natural world after all. There wasn't enough space for these guys to have their own territory. This was just like tigers. Other than mating time, the males and females of tigers would not see each other throughout the year. Even at that time, the male tiger would be chased away by the female tiger after they were done with their business, not giving them any face at all. But now, look at the tigers in nature reserves and zoos. Not to mention sharing a territory with others. Even sharing a territory with different species of animals wouldn't be a problem. Otherwise, where do you think the liger beasts came from? In a group like this, they would be forced to choose a leader like a pack of wolves. This leader was basically chosen by the humans, because the humans wouldn't watch them rebel against them. As for those troublemakers, well, if they weren't released back into the wild, they would be locked up, or they would just die. It was that simple. Then I'll leave it to it. Hearing Hardadef's words, Zhang also nodded and put Chirps on the ground. Remember to watch its movements. It has no malice toward you. It wants to teach you how to fly. Touching Chirp's head, Zhang said to it. He didn't know if it understood, but anyway, it's not nervous now. After seeing Chirps quiet down, Martha also jumped down from Hardadef's arm and strode to Chirp's side. Then, it jogged 2 steps and instantly spread its wings like a whirlwind. With a whoosh, its wings flapped powerfully a few times and took it off the ground. The movement of its tail made it like a missile, almost instantly flying into the distant forest. After making a circle, it landed again and looked at Xueqi just like that. And Chirps looked at Martha's appearance and seemed to have figured it out. It imitated Martha's movements, ran a few steps forward, flapped its wings, and flew up with all its strength. But unfortunately, the first time wasn't so easy. Bang! Chirps, who had just flapped its wings a few times, dived down when it was less than half a meter above the ground. However, after it got up, it was a little confused, but it was not afraid. Instead, it looked at Martha in confusion. This is a good start. Seeing that Chirps seemed to have really learned how to fly, Dominica was also very surprised. Yes. In any case, its feet were off the ground. This was an improvement. At this moment, Martha once again walked in front of Chirps. After a caw, she took off again. Just like before, one had to admit that it wasn't easy for such a big bird to take off from the ground. But the bald sea eagle was really strong. It didn't seem to be too tired after taking off continuously. The second time was even faster. After circling around in the air, it landed on the ground again and looked at Chirps as if to say, "It's your turn now." Seeing its gaze, Chirps seemed to be emboldened and quickly ran a few steps forward. Compared to the general bald sea eagle, Chirps' physical fitness was much better. And most importantly, because it had been running on the ground, its claws and legs were still quite strong. This time, after running a few steps, it directly jumped up. At the same time, it flapped its wings. It tried to fly up, but unfortunately, after flapping 4 or 5 times, it flew about 2 meters high and couldn't fly anymore. But this time, it didn't directly fall down. Instead, it spread its wings in the air and learned from Martha to glide forward for a while before falling to the ground. But after this time, it was much more excited than before. This time, Martha came to its side again, but she didn't fly directly. Instead, she deliberately spread her wings, as if teaching it how to flap its wings to let itself fly. Of course, she also taught it how to control its wings. Speaking of which, the 3-year-old Martha wasn't a flying expert, especially in front of those wild bald sea eagles. But when it comes to guidance, it was really quite good. It was like a university professor and a kindergarten teacher. The knowledge of a university professor was naturally a few streets ahead of a kindergarten teacher. But when it comes to teaching children, 10 professors together may not be as useful as a kindergarten teacher. This was the role of guidance. Martha was indeed a good teacher, at least she didn't show impatience, and Chirps was like a piece of sponge that quickly absorbed the secrets of flying, and it flew higher and higher, more and more stable. After a few more attempts, Chirps finally flew up. Although it still didn't fly very high, it swayed and flew to a branch about 5 or 6 meters above the ground. Then it excitedly cried at Zhang. Hearing its cry, Zhang knew that this was its cry of excitement. Sure enough, after slowing down for a while, it was like a little kid who had just learned how to ride a bicycle. With a push of its claws, it flew down from the tree branch in the next second. It spread its huge wings and flew clumsily in the sky. Although there are still a lot of problems with turning, landing, and taking off, at least now it can fly, and it has learned to use its tail to turn. That's not bad. Looking at Chirps flying, Dominica smiled. This was not a small progress. It finally learned. Seeing Chirps flying slowly in the sky, Zhang also nodded with satisfaction. In any case, Chirps finally learned how to fly. This also solved one of Zhang worries. After all, he promised Chirps that he would let it learn to fly. Chirps in the air also cried excitedly. After flying for about half an hour, it landed on the ground again. Although it fell a little, it didn't care. After getting up, it ran excitedly to Zhang and kept jumping, as if to tell Zhang that it learned to fly. Yes, it finally learned to fly. Good job. Zhang put it on his arm again and lifted it up. He rubbed its head hard. And Chirps was also willing to let Jiang Hai pat its head like a puppy. Its eyes narrowed. It's finally a success. In the future, let it go back and train it well. It won't be long before it can fly very well. But if you don't have such a bird net in your house, you still have to be careful. Some birds that fly away won't fly back. On the other side, John also took Martha. He was very surprised to see that Chirps had learned to fly. Because he didn't expect Chirps to learn so quickly. He didn't expect Jiang Hai's white-headed sea eagle to be a little genius. This time, I really have to thank you and Martha for your help, Jiang Hai said. He walked in front of John and touched Martha first. To be honest, this time it was indeed thanks to the help of this white-headed sea eagle called Martha. Therefore, Jiang Hai wasn't stingy and directly injected a scales aura into Martha. The moment the aura was injected, Jiang Hai felt that Martha's body had begun to change. In the future it would become bigger, stronger and smarter. And most importantly, it had a trace of connection with Jiang Hai. Of course, Jiang Hai didn't intend to take it under his command. Even if he was willing, John and the others wouldn't agree. He just wanted to give it a chance to become better. With a shake of John's arm, Martha also flew back to the tree. It now needed time to digest the aura's energy. Chapter 533. After solving the problem of Xueqi's inability to fly, Jiang Hai went to the research institute with John. He talked to the person in charge there about buying arowana. If Jiang Hai had talked to the scholars directly, he would have probably failed. Jiang Hai knew that most researchers had weird tempers. Some of them were born to despise the rich. If Jiang Hai had talked to them, he would have probably failed. But it was different if he talked to the person in charge. The person in charge was basically a manager or a businessman. They were willing to sell their extra things without ruining the research. In their eyes, those things were useless to them. They might as well sell them directly, especially when they saw Jiang Hai's $100,000. Everything was easy with money. Very soon, he took Jiang Hai to the pond where the arowana were kept and told Jiang Hai that he could choose his arowana. Jiang Hai had donated $100,000, which was more than 600,000 yuan. Naturally, he wouldn't choose the silver dragons for 600,000 yuan. After all, no matter how big a silver dragon was, it couldn't be worth more than 10,000 yuan. Apart from the silver dragons, Jiang Hai wasn't picky about the gold dragons and the green dragons, because they weren't very expensive either. The baby of a gold dragon was only worth 600 to 700 yuan. If it was from a large fishery, it could be sold for more than 1,000 yuan in the country. However, even if it was an adult, it wasn't worth 600,000 yuan, not even a high-back gold dragon. So, Jiang Hai only chose the gold dragons and red dragons. Taking advantage of the fact that this guy didn't know much about these things, Jiang Hai asked for an exorbitant price and chose 4 pairs of gold dragons in total, which were all raised for 2 years. Although they couldn't give birth yet, they were already half a meter long. They had a golden head and a blue bottom. Although they weren't the most expensive purple ones, such a golden dragon could be sold for at least 30,000 yuan in the country, and this was still a priceless one. After all, no one would sell these fish. In the country, these fish were feng shui fish. Only people bought them and rarely sold them. According to Jiang Hai's estimation, these 8 fish alone were worth more than 200,000 yuan. Not to mention that he also chose many red dragons. He didn't buy the ordinary red dragons or even the orange ones. He only wanted the capsicum red dragons and the blood red dragons. These 2 kinds of fish are produced in Southeast Asia. Although Jiang Hai is very ashamed of those monkeys from Southeast Asia, these guys are still quite willing to give up on their godfather, the United States. It's just that some of the arowana were sent in batches. Although the arowana is extremely precious in China, in the United States, there are not many people who raise it. Jiang Hai chose 4 pairs of blood red dragons and 2 pairs of capsicum red dragons. The price of the blood red dragons was very expensive. With an average length of 25 centimeters, it could be sold for at least 8,000 yuan. As for the gold dragons of the same size, it would be deducted by a 0. What's more, the fish that Jiang Hai picked were all half a meter long. According to Jiang Hai's estimation, the domestic retail price of the 8 blood red dragons was around 80,000 to 90,000 US dollars. Just these 8 fish alone were worth 100,000 US dollars. The capsicum red dragon was even more expensive. It was easy to sell a fish that was more than a meter long after 5 years for more than 1,000,000 yuan. This kind of fish was the most expensive and common arowana, other than the snow dragon and platinum dragon. Of course, these fish were only half a meter long now, but Zhang Hai believed that it wouldn't be a big deal if they grew to a meter long. After choosing these fish, the people here specially changed a pond for Zhang Hai so that Zhang Hai could raise them alone. Zhang Hai took Xueqi and Dominica to the car. They were going to order a fish tank first and then come back to pick up the fish. Although the price of these fishes may not be as high as Chinese bahabas, long-jawed swordfish, and the like, don't forget, these are ornamental fishes. Zhang Hai can't just put them directly in the river. A fish tank is essential. And his fish tank naturally couldn't be like the aquarium of ordinary people. After all, no matter how big the aquarium was, it couldn't hold 20 arowana. So, Zhang Hai decided to build an aquarium wall. These small things couldn't be settled with money. He drove straight back to Winthrop. He didn't know anyone in Boston, so it was better to go back to Winthrop. To thank Dominica, Zhang Hai specially treated her to a good meal at the French restaurant in Winthrop. After sending her back to the homeless pet center, Zhang Hai went to a shop in Winthrop that specialized in selling fish tanks. Zhang Hai was a very famous person in Winthrop. After arriving, Zhang Hai explained his purpose of visit. The shop even gave Zhang Hai a discount. A wall made of fish tanks, including internal circulation and water filtration, cost Zhang Hai $2,000. Zhang Hai didn't say much and paid the full amount. After that, the shop owner brought his staff to Zhang Hai's villa and measured the place where Zhang Hai wanted to put the fish tank wall. The place where Zhang Hai wanted to put the fish tank wall was next to the restaurant on the first floor. This way, he could look at the water while eating. It was quite good. After the two people arrived, they began to measure the length, width, and height. Zhang Hai wanted to raise 20 arowana. Who knew how big these arowana would be after absorbing the spiritual energy, so everything had to be as big as possible. Zhang Hai planned to make the fish tank 3.5 meters high, the same height as the rack on the first floor, 2 meters wide, and 8 meters long. It was enough to put 20 fish in. According to Zhang Hai, such a big fish tank would take about 3 days if it was made of glass. Zhang Hai didn't care. 3 days was 3 days. Anyway, they were going to help with the installation. Zhang Hai didn't care. Did you really buy a lot of arowana? After the two people left, Bernice looked at Zhang Hai and gently poked Zhang Hai. She couldn't believe it. Zhang Hai really dared to buy anything. He wasn't afraid of not being able to raise them. I didn't buy them. They were given to me as a gift, okay? Hearing Bernice's words, Zhang Hai rolled his eyes at her and said seriously, "TSK, they just bought it. If you didn't donate 100,000 yuan, they wouldn't have given it to you. But the Americans are really stupid. If what you said is true, then the 20 fish you bought are worth more than $200,000. They are really willing to part with it." Zhang Hai didn't know what Bernice's family did in China, because she never said it, but Zhang Hai could see that Bernice's family was very rich in China. Otherwise, it would be impossible for her to set up a research institute in the United States. The Americans don't know much about this. Shrugging, Zhang Hai said with a smile. Indeed, this time he picked up some benefits. The most important thing is that he is not afraid of death. With the help of spiritual energy, even if he doesn't raise them well, these fish will grow at a speed beyond the imagination of ordinary people, and they won't get sick or die until they die. Zhang Hai, can chirps really fly? Just as Zhang Hai was dealing with Bernice here, Daliana and Marian ran over. Compared to the fish bought by Zhang Hai, they were more interested in whether chirps could fly. Of course. As soon as chirps was mentioned, Zhang Hai remembered that today's protagonist was not those arowana, but chirps. Thinking of this, he also wanted chirps to show its new ability, so he waved his hand. Chirps, who became a free-range chicken after returning to the manor, also jumped over happily. In fact, it also wanted to try flying, but Zhang Hai didn't let it fly, and it didn't dare to. Now that it saw Zhang Hai calling it, it also jumped happily. Looking at chirps, in fact, little Ya and Bernice were also very curious. Can this guy fly? Even Azalina came out of her room and followed them outside. After arriving at the lawn outside, Zhang Hai waved his hand. Chirps also hurriedly ran a few steps, then with the help of her powerful legs, she stomped on the ground. As it jumped up from the ground, it opened its arms and waved them in an instant. The great rock rises with the wind, soaring up 90,000 miles. Although Chirps was just a white-headed sea eagle, compared to the primitive monsters, it was still much weaker. But now, Chirps was still very powerful when it took off. After flapping its wings a few times, it went straight into the clouds. While patrolling inside Zhang Hai's manor, the livestock that Zhang Hai brought back from the riverside couldn't help but be stunned when they saw the chirping birds in the sky. Chickens were also crowing, pigs were jumping, and sheep were also bleating. It must be known that the recipe of the white-headed sea eagle was still vivid in their minds. This was a kind of fear that was deeply imprinted in their DNA. Therefore, these animals couldn't help but be afraid. When Xueqi flew into the woods, it instantly attracted countless birds. This was also because they were afraid. They looked at Xueqi in the sky as if it was a king patrolling his territory. To be honest, Zhang Hai and the others' hearts were surging, especially the girls. Looking at Chirp in the sky, they were happy for it. They were also very excited. Looking at this giant bird flying in the sky, it really made them feel emotional. Even little Yellow and Xiao Bai stopped playing. They were a little stunned when they saw their little brother, which they used to bully, in the sky. This was especially so for Bucktooth, who had come together with Chirps. The relationship between the two beasts was usually the best, but looking at Xueqi's current state, the terror of a prey encountering a predator in the depths of Daifeng's bone marrow still made it a little confused. On one hand, the Ji-dong in its DNA was telling it to run quickly. On the other hand, his little brain was telling him that it was a companion and there was no need to run. The two completely different voices made him feel a little silly. However, although Chirps can fly, its spiritual wisdom is still there. After flying in the air for about 10 minutes, it landed on Zhang Hai's lawn again, with a face full of excitement. Hearing its voice, the girls on this side reacted and immediately surrounded it. This one touched it. The other one kissed it. They don't know if it's a blessing or a curse for it to be able to fly. Chapter 534. Hold the bottom and cut here. Make sure you don't cut it crookedly. Then, put the cut in this box. Do you understand? Standing under the vines of the vineyard, Aphrodite leaned on Zhang Hai's side with a serious face and told him the things to pay attention to. Unknowingly, the days of August finally passed. As time passed, it was September. More than 90% of the grapes in the manor were already familiar. Today was also the first day of grape harvesting. Zhang Hai had been at home for almost 10 days since he returned from Atlantic City. He didn't stay idle this week. First, he taught Xueqi how to fly. Then he bought arowana. A few days ago, after the fish tank was delivered, he set it up for another day and let the water circulate according to the schedule. Although the water was very pure underground water, Zhang Hai still followed his habits in China. After 5 days, he drove his F-650 to pick up the arowana. In fact, Zhang Hai let the water circulate for so many days because it was unnecessary. Because in China, the water circulates for more than 4 days. The main reason was that drinking water in most of the cities in China was basically water from water treatment plants. Sterilizing substances such as bleach were added in the water. Not only did it cool the water, but it also killed most of the bacteria in it. Therefore, the water had to be boiled before drinking when it arrived at home. Raising fish also required a period of time because the chlorine in the water was very heavy. After putting the fish in, if it was some bad fish, it would be very easy for them to adapt. Many good fish died because of this. But in America, Zhang Hai didn't know about other places. But in Winthrop, his home didn't need to do this. Because the water vein in Zhang Hai's house was directly connected to the Alabama mountains, it was almost the same quality as the water from a certain mountain spring brand in China. It could be drunk directly and didn't need to be boiled. Of course, there would be some sand and the like in it. Therefore, every household installed a very thin water net to ensure that no residue would come over. Therefore, this kind of water could be drunk directly by turning on the tap. There were no chemicals or sand. However, to be on the safe side, Zhang Hai filtered the fish for 5 days before bringing it back. The top of the fish tank was directly connected to the second floor. There was a lid there, and Zhang Hai had to pour the fish in there. Before pouring them in, Zhang Hai consumed 4 pieces of spiritual qi and injected the spiritual qi into the fish's body. As for what these fishes ate, it was common knowledge in China. Feeding arowana meant feeding them alive. Although some people said that the fish's eyes would fall out, Zhang Hai believed that his spiritual energy was enough to help him. As for the small fish they caught, it was very simple. There were plenty in the river, and if there weren't in the river, there were plenty in the sea. Therefore, these guys didn't have to worry about their food. After being busy for 2 days, the fish finally settled down in Zhang Hai's house. Zhang Hai finally felt that he could relax a bit, but as the owner of the manor, the grapes ripened. As the owner of the manor, the most idle people in the manor, Zhang Hai and the others were called over by Dulles Gerard to help harvest the grapes. Ah! Hearing Aphrodite's words, Zhang Hai couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed. Because to be honest, he didn't listen carefully to what Aphrodite said just now because she was too close to him just now. Not only could he smell the faint fragrance on Aphrodite's body, but most importantly, his body was touching Aphrodite's back. With this gentle touch, Zhang Hai, who hadn't eaten meat for many days, couldn't help but feel a little spirited. What are you thinking about? If you want, I'll look for you tonight. At first, seeing that Zhang Hai didn't react, Aphrodite was stunned for a moment, but then she felt a certain part of Zhang Hai's body, and her face couldn't help but turn red. If it was a normal time, she would be happy that Zhang Hai had such feelings for her, but not now. It's not that she was shy, but because these grapes were personally planted by them, if they were to rot in the ground, she would be very distressed. Cough, you misunderstood. Ah, cut it like this, I know. Hearing Aphrodite's words, Zhang Hai smiled awkwardly, and then picked up a bunch of grapes to cut it, but as soon as he finished cutting, he was slapped by Aphrodite. Cut here, root here, not the vine. Do you want it to grow grapes next year? You can't cut here, cut here. Hearing Aphrodite's words, Zhang Hai also smiled. To be honest, he really didn't know this, but after listening to Aphrodite's words, he also scratched his head and seriously cut the grapes. Teacher, you must be tired, take a rest. While Zhang Hai was seriously cutting the grapes, O'Connor Murphy in the distance also smiled and came over with a big box of grapes, and put it next to Dulles Gerard who was still cutting the grapes. Hey, I'm fine. Although he was sweating all over, Gerard waved his hand indifferently. In fact, his previous physical condition was not as good as it is now. After all, he was old and there were no major illnesses in his body, but minor illnesses were constantly occurring. But since he came to Zhang Hai's manor, drinking good water every day and eating food with spiritual energy, any minor illness can be cured. The extra spiritual energy could also be used to slowly transform the human body. So although Dulles Gerard is quite old, his physical fitness is really good. This can't be finished in a day, teacher. You still need to prepare the brewing. Looking at Dulles Gerard's unyielding appearance, O'Connor Murphy also smiled and forcibly pulled him under the grapevines. Okay, but I really didn't expect that this year's grapes could be harvested so much. Looking at the bunch of grapes in the garden in front of him, Dulles Gerard said with a satisfied face. Yeah, I didn't expect it either. Hearing his words, O'Connor Murphy also said seriously. In fact, when the grapes were first planted, the main nutrients were concentrated on the vine in the first year of climbing, so the grapes will not bear grapes in the first year, only a small number of grapes in the second and third years, and then it will be the peak period of the grapes. This is naturally known to both O'Connor and Dulles, and they came here to make money for Zhang Hai. They can wait, but Zhang Hai can't wait, so they didn't buy new vines and grapes. In March, they directly bought 4-year grapevines and planted them. But according to their thinking, although they are old vines, they are still newly planted. It would be good if the vines could grow a little in the first year, but they didn't expect that Zhang Hai's manor was a treasure. What a joke! The grapes grown in the first year have already caught up with the amount of grapes produced by other manors in 5 or 6 years. Not only is the quantity good, but the quality of the grapes is also very good. I'm wondering, aren't we planting Cabernet Sauvignon? Why is it so good? Shaking his head, O'Connor pinched a grape and stuffed it into his mouth. The moment the grape entered his mouth, the clear fragrance, along with the sweetness and sourness, rushed straight to his taste buds. Although he might not be able to stand it if he ate too much, he had to admit that the taste was very good. It was even better than the grapes that could be sold outside. It's also because of this that I'm a little worried that it will be a little troublesome to remove the sugar. After hearing O'Connor's words, Dulles let out a sigh and picked up a grape, putting it into his mouth, and said while munching on it, "The grapes used for wine and the grapes eaten were different. The grapes eaten were very sweet, accompanied by sourness, and it tasted very good. The grapes used for wine, on the other hand, were especially sour, accompanied by a bitter taste, and it tasted very bad. Anyone who had made wine before knew that very few people liked to eat it. However, the grapes had to be used to make wine. The main point of red wine was to remove the sugar in it. This was also the difference between Xueqi's ancient wine and foreign wine, but with Zhang Hai's spirit energy transformation. Now that Zhang Hai's grapes tasted very good, it was a little awkward. The grapes now were indeed Cabernet Sauvignon. They were very big, very plump, and very delicious. However, no one knew how these grapes would taste when they were used to make wine. However, they could only give it a try now. Okay, let's continue. According to Zhang Hai, there will be a way when the car reaches the mountain, and the boat will cross the bridge when it reaches the bridge. There's no point in talking about it here. Once we finish harvesting the grapes and make a batch, we'll know when we taste it. Seeing that O'Connor was a little worried, Dulles smiled. Although he had been making red wine for decades, this was the first time he encountered such a situation. However, he knew that he couldn't panic now. Moreover, Zhang Hai had also told him that these grapes tasted bad even if they were used to make wine. They could also be sold. One must know that in the United States, the price of vegetables and fruits wasn't cheaper than meat. With this bountiful vineyard, he wouldn't lose money if he sold these grapes. He could even make a small profit of a few $100,000. Of course, if they were made into wine, that would be the real money. Most importantly, Zhang Hai didn't think that these grapes couldn't be used to make wine. Everything had to wait until the wine was made. There was nothing to be anxious about. Unknowingly, the morning's harvest time was over. Zhang Hai and the others had harvested more than 30 boxes of grapes. These grapes actually only occupied about 1/10 of the vineyard. It seemed that they would be busy for a while. After lunch, because the weather outside was still a little hot, they didn't immediately go to harvest the grapes. Instead, they sat in the room and first removed the grapes from the vines. After removing the grapes, they threw them into a large wooden barrel. According to Dulles Gerard, this was the traditional winemaking method, although it was a little disgusting. Chapter 535. As for the steps of making wine, it was actually not a very difficult craft. Whether it was domestic Baidu or overseas Google, as long as one went online, they could easily find the steps of making wine. This was not difficult, but it was mainly divided into 8 steps. The first step was to remove the stalks, which was what Zhang Hai and the others were doing now. Remove the grapes from the stem and throw them into the wooden barrel. The second step was to crush them, which was to crush the grapes in the barrel. The third step was to ferment, which was to add yeast to the crushed grapes. This time was to test the skill of the master, which was Dulles Gerard. The reason why red wine was red was because of the fermentation of the peel. The astringent taste came from the seeds, which was the taste released by the grape seeds. After waiting for the local wine to be almost ready, they would use the juicer to squeeze the fermented wine, then filter it, remove the remaining peel and seeds, and continue to ferment. This stage mainly determined the taste of the wine. Different fermentation times would lead to different tastes. Of course, the most important thing was the existence of sugar. When the sugar was almost completely fermented, it would be dry wine. When the sugar content was between 4 to 12 grams per liter, it would be called semi-dry wine. When the total sugar content was between 12 to 50 grams per liter, it would be called semi-sweet wine. When the sugar content was more than 50 grams, it would be sweet wine. After the fermentation, the dregs would be removed, and all the residual characteristics would be removed. After that, it would be ripe, which meant that it should be put into the barrel. The barrel must be made of oak, and it would take about 2 years for the wine to mature. Of course, the current society was very fast, and too many people would spend 2 years waiting for these wines. So now, 99.5% of the wine on the market was all hooked. Mixing these new wines with some old wines, and after a few months, they could be directly bottled and sold for money. Dulles Gerard used the ancient method of making wine, and the steps were the same as these, but it was more manual than machine. Of course, things like juicing, filtering, and so on would definitely use machines, and manual labor would not work. But to speak of the most important fermentation, putting in the barrel, and crushing, he asked for manual labor. According to him, the most traditional wine in France had to be smashed by young girls. Take note, they had to be young girls. In other words, they had to be women who had never fought with men before. After washing their bodies, they had to go in and crush them. Therefore, in Europe during the Middle Ages, every noble would keep some of these women to make wine for themselves. But as you know, that was the Middle Ages. In this modern age, there are very few girls who haven't fought with men. Whether it's the United States or Europe, generally speaking, there are almost no girls who are still 14 or 15 years old. However, Zhang Hai had a lot of original ones. Look at Delina, Marion, Bernice, and Little Ya. With some help from Zhang Hai, from a medical point of view, he had never fought before. However, Dana and the others were unwilling to step on them because they felt that their bodies might taint these grapes. Mainly, the four of them were the ones who went in to step on them. In fact, Azalina was also there, but she was too lazy to join in the fun. After throwing these grapes into the wooden barrels, Dulles told Delina and the others to step on one of the barrels when it was full. Whether it was Delina, Marion, Bernice, or Little Ya, they were all very interested in stepping on this thing. Looking at the purple juice running around in front of him and the cheerful looks of the girls, Zhang Hai felt a little nauseous. He wasn't a masochist. After all, he was stepping on them with his feet. Originally, he was very curious about his wine, but after seeing this scene, he didn't want to drink it anymore. Well, the visual impact was actually quite strong. Zhang Hai didn't have the habit of drinking other people's foot-washing water, even if these people were beautiful girls. He didn't have such a strong taste. But if this wine could be sold for money, he didn't mind. After stomping on a pot of grapes, Dulles would sprinkle some yeast powder into it. Then he sealed it up. After stepping on the grapes at noon, he continued to collect them in the afternoon. The winery in this manner had stopped producing wine 10 years ago, and the original owner had gone bankrupt. But he still had a lot of barrels and basins left, plus the ones that Zhang Hai bought. There were quite a lot of them. At least, it wasn't a problem to finish these grapes. In the afternoon, they continued to work and pick them up. Perhaps because of the experience in the morning, they were a lot faster in the afternoon. They picked more grapes in the afternoon than in the morning. And in the evening, Edouard Anderson and Robbins Garcia came over to help. They put the grapes into the wooden barrels, and the four girls continued to step on them. They were busy until 10 o'clock in the evening, and the day was finally over. Thinking that this kind of day would last for at least 5 days, Zhang Hai felt a little tired, mentally tired. Okay, I'll have to trouble everyone. When the wine is brewed, you can drink to your heart's content. Now you can all go back. After clapping his hands, Zhang Hai stood up and said to everyone in front of him. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, everyone couldn't help but smile. After helping Dulles carry the things, everyone went back to their own places. Because they were only there to help, Zhang Hai didn't intend to pay them. Edouard Anderson and Robbins Garcia didn't want to be paid. To them, the wine was something that they would have to drink in the future. Although they didn't know, how could they drink it when they saw the girls step on it? But if they wanted to drink it, Zhang Hai wouldn't be stingy. Following Zhang Hai's order, the people who were still crowded in the square in front of the villa gradually dispersed. Zhang Hai and the others also dragged their slightly tired bodies back to their rooms. After taking their baths, they walked to the hot spring in the distance. Women always had some troubles, unlike Zhang Hai. After walking into the male bathroom, he took off his clothes and soaked in the hot spring. He had to admit that Zhang Hai's hot spring was indeed a good thing. As soon as he soaked in, he felt his body become much lighter. Even though Zhang Hai's body was now completely inhuman, soaking in the hot spring still made him moan a few times. After burying his body below his neck in the water, Zhang Hai casually touched the remote control beside him and pressed a button. A light shot out from the front of Zhang Hai's hot spring. Then, a 3D TV screen appeared in front of Zhang Hai. This TV was set up a while ago. Otherwise, it would be meaningless to just soak in the hot spring. Watching TV was also very fun. While casually playing the TV channel in front of him, a burst of laughter suddenly came from the bathroom beside him, followed by the sound of water splashing. Needless to say, Zhang Hai knew that Delina and the others were soaking in the water. Ever since this hot spring was established, Delina, Marion, Bernice, Azalina, and Aphrodite would always come here to take a bath, unless there was a strong wind or a rainy day. Recently, Little Ya had also joined them. Zhang Hai didn't know if it was a psychological effect, but after bathing in the hot spring, the skin of these girls had become better. Their whole bodies were shining. Thinking of shining, Jiang Hai thought of skin. Thinking of their skin, Jiang Hai's mind unconsciously started to fantasize about something. And when he fantasized, his hand unconsciously touched something that he shouldn't touch. This was the biggest difference between men and women. When women wanted to fight, they would always think a lot. This was also the reason why most women could endure loneliness. But when men wanted to fight, 9 out of 10 times, they would inadvertently touch something. Feeling the difference, Jiang Hai looked around, then picked up the remote control, turned the volume to the minimum, and then switched to the pay channel. After changing a few channels, Jiang Hai saw a romantic action idol drama from Japan. The female lead was called Kirishima Naomi. Jiang Hai liked her very much. She was a contestant with heavy makeup, and her face was always covered with a thick layer of makeup. Some people said that this woman looked like a ghost after removing her makeup, but Jiang Hai rejected him with a pro-Walton sentence. What does it have to do with you whether she looks like a ghost or not? You just admire her, don't tell me you want to marry her and have children with her. So some things didn't need to be so serious, it was good enough to just watch. Just as Jiang Hai was watching seriously over there, suddenly in the next room, Aphrodite suddenly said that she had a stomachache and went ashore to go to the bathroom. But in less than a minute, her figure appeared behind Jiang Hai. Hey! Looking at Jiang Hai who was watching the movie seriously, Aphrodite patted Jiang Hai softly. Ha! Cough you! Feeling being patted by someone, Jiang Hai reacted. As soon as he turned around, he saw Aphrodite, but he was startled. Just as he was about to say something, Aphrodite covered his mouth and pointed to the bathroom next to him. Why are you here? After Aphrodite let go of his hand, Jiang Hai couldn't help but sink into the water. At the same time, he turned off the TV and asked Aphrodite in a low voice. This girl is too bold, she just walked in like this? I came to find you. Tiska, it looks like you're not doing anything good. Instead of being on the ground being hit by the water. Give it to me. Aphrodite looked at Jiang Hai's slightly worried look, licked her lips gently, and then said to Jiang Hai with sparkling eyes. Ha! Hearing her words before Jiang Hai could react, Aphrodite had already rushed up. Chapter 536. Splash! With a loud noise, the towering water column flew into the air and turned into a drizzle. At this time, in the pool under the drizzle, Jiang Hai and Aphrodite were already hugging each other. Jiang Hai, what the hell are you doing? Hearing the splash, Bernice, who was in the next room, couldn't help but ask loudly. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also stood up from the pool. Jiang Hai only managed to escape from Aphrodite's mouth after pinching Aphrodite's nipple a little. Oh, I just poked her hard. Hearing the voice on the other side, Jiang Hai had nothing to say other than nonsense. And while Jiang Hai was talking nonsense, Aphrodite took the initiative to squat down and look at Jiang Hai's battle in front of her. Then she stretched her head over. Really, how old are you? Hearing Jiang Hai's explanation, Bernice couldn't help but grumble. Ah, Laughing awkwardly, Jiang Hai looked at Aphrodite under him and slowly leaned against the stone next to the pool. Now, he couldn't say anything. While enjoying himself, he had to be careful not to make any noise. After about 20 minutes, Aphrodite raised her head and whispered in Jiang Hai's ear, "My mouth is tired." Hearing her words, Jiang Hai didn't have to think too much. It was already good enough that he didn't take the initiative to tease them. Now that they had delivered themselves to his door, what was there to be polite about? He immediately carried Aphrodite to the shore and the battle began. Why was Aphrodite gone for so long? At this time, on the other side of the bathroom, because after a busy day, these girls' physical fitness was far inferior to that of the monster Jiang Hai. Now that they had soaked in the hot spring, everyone closed their eyes and rested for a while, preparing to soak comfortably and go back to sleep. But there were always some people who didn't fit in, such as Dinah Taylor. Seeing that no one was in the mood to talk, she swam away and began to look for her good friend Aphrodite. But after looking around, she was a little surprised to find that Aphrodite hadn't returned yet. So she quietly went ashore and deliberately went to the bathroom to take a look, but found that she wasn't there either. So she wrapped a bath towel around her and prepared to go out to take a look, but just as she reached the door of the female bathroom, she seemed to hear a low voice coming from next door. This made her a little suspicious, but she wasn't timid either. So she quietly went to the male bathroom. Just as she poked her head in, she saw that under the illumination of the light, Aphrodite, whom she was looking for, was lying on the long bench in the male changing room. She was holding a towel with both hands and stuffing one end of the towel into her mouth so that she wouldn't make a sound. On the other side of her, Jiang Hai was flexing his muscles as he carried Aphrodite's slender legs into battle. Needless to say, it was obvious what the two were doing. Dinah couldn't help but jump in fright when she saw this. Just as she was about to call out, she covered her mouth. Then, she quietly stood there and watched the battle inside. Unknowingly, she also felt that something wasn't quite right with her own body. Her consciousness had already substituted herself into Aphrodite's world, and through her eyes, there were some indescribable places that kept attacking her three views. After an unknown amount of time, perhaps 20 minutes, perhaps 40 minutes, or perhaps more than an hour, Jiang Hai finally stopped his battle. Aphrodite also breathed heavily and closed her eyes in satisfaction, enjoying the aftertaste of the impact. As for Dinah, she was already a little unsteady on her feet, but she still took a few deep breaths, then supported herself against the wall and slowly walked back to the female bathroom. Entering the bath, about 10 minutes later, Aphrodite also came back. At this time, the girls also took a bath and returned to their own rooms. Apart from Aphrodite and Dinah, no one else knew that the battle just happened next door to them. Dinah's gaze towards Aphrodite was also a little different. The two of them lived in the same villa. After changing their clothes, everyone dispersed. Jiang Hai had already returned to his own room to sleep. It was the same for Aphrodite. She was really exhausted now, but her heart was unusually satisfied. Dinah bit her lip as she watched Aphrodite's back view enter the room. If this was possible, then she might have a chance. Just as everyone in Jiang Hai's manor was slowly drifting off to sleep, on the other side of the ocean in Huaxia, it was noon. In a modeling agency, AI Xueqi and Feng Yunchen had just finished their lunch and returned to their office. As Feng Yunchen and AI Xueqi semi-confirmed their relationship with Jiang Hai, their status in the company also rose accordingly. However, this actually had nothing to do with Jiang Hai, but mainly because of Qi Li. Although Qi Li couldn't wait to strangle these two vixens to death, as the saying goes, even if you don't give the monk face, you still have to give the Buddha face. With Jiang Hai here to take care of them, she couldn't do anything to them. Moreover, she had to ensure their safety. If anything happened to them, Jiang Hai would inevitably link it to her. This wasn't to say that Qi Li was despicable. Apart from Jiang Hai, this tree, she was going to hang herself here. The reason why she cared about Jiang Hai was that she felt a little different from Jiang Hai. Secondly, it was also because her main business now was the 4 restaurants, and Jiang Hai was her only supplier. If something really happened between Jiang Hai and her, then it wouldn't just be a matter of divorcing her. It was very likely that she would lose her money too. It was precisely because of this that Qi Li swallowed her anger to help Jiang Hai take care of these two emotional enemies. And most importantly, she knew that it was impossible for Feng Yunchen and Jiang Hai to be together. This guy was destined to be a mistress. However, this AI Xueqi was hard to say. She was younger than her and was not worse than her. Moreover, according to Feng Yunchen's words, her first battle was for Jiang Hai. Although Qi Li and Jiang Hai had only met a few times, she knew that Jiang Hai was a very kind-hearted person. He would definitely not let the woman who fought with him for the first time get hurt. It was precisely because of this that Qi Li would protect them. In the past, this company didn't dare to show off when a 9th-class rich businessman protected Feng Yunchen. Now, with the protection of the Qi family, who would dare to show off? Especially recently, after Jiang Hai and the imperial court reached some secret cooperation. The imperial court had always given the green light to the Qi family. After the incident with the Yin family, the Qi family could do whatever they wanted. No one would stop them. In this month, the Qi family's assets had increased by almost 1/10. And no one dared to trouble them. For a time, the Qi family was in the limelight in the imperial capital. However, as the old saying in Huaxia, a tall tree attracts the wind. There was also an old European saying that if God wants to destroy it, he must first make it crazy. Although the Qi family was expanding, the steps were not very big. This was also the decision of Jiang Hai and Qi Li. If one worked steadily and did not reveal any flaws, the money would be endless. However, if one left any weakness and was caught by the enemy, it would be fatal. Therefore, Xueqi had vetoed a lot of proposals recently, but she was still walking steadily. However, although they didn't expand excessively, in the circle of the imperial capital, the Qi family had steadily risen to the top of the second grade. For a modeling company like this, if they only relied on selling photos and models going out to participate in car shows and SG to take a commission, they would have gone bankrupt long ago. A modeling company like this more or less had some kind of outside wall transactions. As for those little models, they were very well informed. The Qi family was so powerful, and they even had Feng Yunqin and Ai Xiaoxi under their protection. No one dared to provoke them in the company, and no one dared to have any ideas about them. Even whether they came to work or not depended on their mood. If they wanted to take a job, they would take it. If they didn't want to take it, they wouldn't take it. This was their privilege. Of course, the premise was that they didn't lack money. Zhang Hai had given them a lot. What are we eating tonight? The two were in the same office. After sitting down, Feng Yunqin took the initiative to ask. We just finished lunch, and you're already thinking about what to eat tonight. Sister Chen, I don't want to criticize you, but aren't you afraid of getting fat? Hearing Feng Yunqin's words, Ai Xiaoxi smiled and casually turned on the computer in front of her. While waiting for the computer to turn on, she said to Feng Yunqin, "What's there to be afraid of? Zhang Hai likes girls with small muscles. When I get fatter, I'll train them into muscles. Zhang Hai will love me to death." Feng Yunqin stretched her neck, picked up the makeup products, and said while touching up her makeup, "Yes, but the premise is that you have to train faster. Otherwise, we don't know when we will go to Zhang Hai. If you are still fat and he doesn't want you, you won't have a place to cry." Ai Xiaoxi smiled and glanced at Feng Yunqin, squinted her eyes and said, "TSK. Have you thought it through?" Looking at Ai Xiaoxi, Feng Yunqin closed the makeup box and said seriously, "Ai, I'm hesitating." Hearing her words, Ai Xiaoxi sighed. She was indeed a little hesitant. "If you ask me, what's there to hesitate about? Just go and be done with it. You won't get married." Hearing Ai Xiaoxi's words, Feng Yunqin said with some disappointment. If she was Ai Xiaoxi, she might have already flown to Zhang Hai's side. But the problem is that she is not. After all, she is a person with a dark history. She will definitely not stay by Zhang Hai's side for long. In fact, Feng Yunqin has long wanted to go to Zhang Hai's side, but if Ai Xiaoxi doesn't go, she can't go. Now she and Ai Xiaoxi are bound. If Ai Xiaoxi doesn't go, then she can't go. This is a hard problem. Let's think about what to eat tonight. Hearing Feng Yunqin's words, Ai Xiaoxi also forced a smile. To be honest, she also wants to go to Zhang Hai, but if she goes, what she might face. She hasn't thought about it yet. Chapter 537. Sometimes, Ai Xiaoxi would think that if she had met Zhang Hai a year ago, would she have chosen to be with Zhang Hai? She didn't know the answer. Although she had a shadow of Zhang Hai in her heart, to be honest, she wasn't sure if it was love. In fact, people who were slightly older would ignore the word love. It wasn't like they were young people who had just come out of university. How could they have so much love and so much like? In fact, between men and women, the word love would gradually disappear after getting along for a long time. When two people first met, they had feelings for each other. That was called good feelings. Later when they met, that was called lust. After the lust ended, it was called passion. After the passion faded, if they got married, it was called habit. Some people said that love was most afraid of getting used to, because when a person got used to another person, then this love would change. However, anyone who had experienced it would understand that it didn't change. This was all easy to say. Who could guarantee that he would be full of passion all year round? It wasn't like he was a stallion who had been injected with hormones. How could he be so passionate? Wasn't he afraid of killing himself? Anyway, no matter what others said, Feng Yunqin wouldn't believe it. In her opinion, women, especially women who were good-looking, only had two kinds of lives in their lives. The first kind was to accept their fate. They had to study hard from a young age, find a job when they grew up, marry a man, and work hard for half their lives. They had to stay at home to take care of their husbands and children, hoping that their husbands would stop fooling around outside and return home early. Then they would make do with their lives until they died. However, although this kind of life was peaceful, there really wasn't much money to spend. Zhang Hai didn't know much about the situation in Feng Yunchen's family, but she was really afraid that she wouldn't have any money to spend. She didn't want to suffer grievances and be looked down upon. She didn't want to earn money with her own blood and sweat, so she could only take a shortcut. However, as a person it was important to have self-awareness. The more money one had, the better. There were many things to consider. Feng Yunchen didn't want to suffer, but she also knew that she didn't want to just live off her youth. In her 30s, she was abandoned by a rich man and then lived the rest of her life like this. In comparison, Zhang Hai was her best choice. He was strong, rich, and good-looking. Since they were classmates, they knew each other well, and he was kind. If she really got together with him, she wouldn't have to worry about being kicked away even if she was old. Although she wouldn't be able to get married, her life would be secure. She was already very satisfied with that. However, Xueqi was different. Yes, she still believed in love. After all, she was a university student who had just graduated. Therefore, she was still a little wary of Zhang Hai. If she only maintained such a relationship with Zhang Hai, then she could ignore Zhang Hai. What Zhang Hai wanted to do was Zhang Hai's business. If Zhang Hai didn't care about her, then she wouldn't care about Zhang Hai. However, she was afraid. When she completely walked to Zhang Hai's side, she was afraid that Zhang Hai would abandon her. She was afraid that Zhang Hai would find another woman. She was afraid that she couldn't accept these. After all, in her mind, she still had a trace of fantasy about one-on-one love. She was afraid that she couldn't accept these, so she had been so hesitant. Not to mention anything else, just the relationship between Feng Yunchen and Zhang Hai, she didn't know what to do. If she was still Zhang Hai's mistress, then she could ignore these things. But if she was Zhang Hai's real woman, in her heart, at least for now, she wouldn't allow Zhang Hai to have any relationship with others, even if this person was Feng Yunchen. Feng Yunchen also experienced this, so she understood what Xueqi was struggling with now, but there were some things that she really couldn't say. Okay, what are we going to eat tonight? Looking at Xueqi's appearance, Feng Yunchen didn't force her and said to her with a smile, "Tonight, let's eat crayfish." After thinking for a while, Xueqi suddenly raised her eyebrows and said with a serious face, "That thing? It's not very hygienic." Feng Yunchen said reluctantly after rolling her eyes at Xueqi. Young girls like to eat these things: fried stinky tofu, spicy crayfish, fried rice cake, spicy hot pot, oden. But for someone as old as Feng Yunchen, she knew that those things were unhygienic and would get sick after eating them. But sometimes what she said might not be useful. At least Xueqi would still secretly eat it herself. "Hey, do I like to eat it?" Hearing Feng Yunchen's words, Xueqi smiled and said foolishly, "I'll call Zhang Hai in a while and tell him to raise some crayfish, and then you can eat as much as you want when you go there. I really don't know what the domestic crayfish are fed with." Feng Yunchen rolled her eyes at Xueqi and said speechlessly, "Hello, Mom." Just as Xueqi was celebrating that she could eat crayfish again tonight, her phone suddenly rang. She picked it up and saw that the person who called her was none other than her mother, so she immediately picked it up. Hearing the call being picked up, a female voice with a strong Lu province accent was heard from the other side of the phone. "I say, Near, it's going to be the Mid-Autumn Festival soon. Are you coming back at the end of the month?" Listening to her mother's slightly cheerful voice on the phone, Xueqi also smiled. Listening to the voice on the phone, Feng Yunchen directly turned her head. Although the Lu province accent is also a northern dialect, to be honest, it is quite different from Mandarin. Bing City has almost no dialects, and only Bing City has no dialects in the 3 provinces in the northeast. That's why when the people from Bing City went to different parts of the country to speak, the people from Bing City could understand them. But when the people from Bing City spoke, very few people from Bing City could understand them. This was because no matter what language they spoke, they would have some local characteristics. Of course, if the people from Bing City spoke Mandarin, they would still be able to understand. For example, Sichuan is known as the 3rd language. To be honest, if you listen to the Sichuan dialect, you can understand it better than Sichuan dialect. The Lu province accent is also very different from normal Mandarin. Not only is the name different, but the intonation is also different, and the pronunciation is also different. When Xueqi's family called in the past, Feng Yunchen also listened to it, but after listening to it once, she gave up. I should be back at the end of the month. Listening to her mother's slightly relaxed words, Ai Xiaoxi also smiled and said, since Zhang Hai gave her money, her family's problems were easily settled. After all, it was not a difficult matter. The money that should be compensated was paid, and the money that should be spent was spent. Under her instructions, she also spent 100,000 renminbi to renovate her house. Now, although her house is not very good, it is still considered above average in the neighborhood. It's good that you are back. Originally, your father did not let me call you, saying that he is afraid of affecting your work. But I still want you to come back to take care of the shield. The most important thing is that Xiao Jiang you mentioned. Is he coming back with you? Hearing that Ai Xiaoxi is coming back, Ai Xiaoxi's mother also hurriedly asked. Xiao Jiang. Maybe he can't come back. He is still abroad now. Listening to her mother's words, Ai Xiaoxi's face could not help but show a trace of awkwardness, because this is really not easy to say. The relationship between her and Zhang Hai is actually not that close, but last time when she took Zhang Hai's money, her parents suspected that she did something shameful outside, such as building a fence outside. Otherwise, where did she get so much money? At that time, Ai Xiaoxi had no choice but to say that Zhang Hai is her boyfriend, and she borrowed the money from Zhang Hai. She will slowly return it when she makes money in the future. Because Zhang Hai is rich, he is not very anxious. Oh, what a pity. We wanted to thank him in person. Hearing Ai Xiaoxi's words, Ai Xiaoxi's mother could not help but sigh. To be honest, she is really curious about this Zhang Hai. This is because she heard that a man who is willing to spend so much money on a little girl is probably not a good person. Although Ai Xiaoxi told them that Zhang Hai is actually not bad, who knows if this guy is a balding old fatty who is about the same age as her and still calls her auntie. If that is the case, her family would rather sell everything than let Ai Xiaoxi and Zhang Hai be together. But now that they can't see each other, she has no choice. Let me ask. To be honest, hearing her mother's disappointed tone, Ai Xiaoxi also felt that it is very difficult to handle. Hearing her daughter's words, Ai Xiaoxi's mother could not help but say, okay, work is important. If you can come back, then come back together. If you can't come back, then go ahead and do your work. You can come back when you have nothing else to do. After hanging up the phone, Ai Xiaoxi looked at the phone in front of her and could not help but rub her temples with a headache. What's wrong? Headache? Looking at Ai Xiaoxi's appearance, Feng Yunchen could not help but laugh. Sometimes, it is really a good thing that there are fewer people in the family. At least, she does not have to have a headache about this matter. Ai Xiaoxi looked at the phone in her hand and did not know if she should tell Zhang Hai that he still needs to think about it. While she was thinking, the lights in the imperial capital gradually lit up. As for Winthrop on the other side of the world, Zhang Hai and the others also woke up from their sleep. After a simple wash, Zhang Hai did not go for a run today. Instead, he changed his clothes and put on gloves and went to the wine manor. There are still so many grapes left to harvest. How can he have the leisure to run? When he arrived there, Dulles Dale and the others were already there. It seems that he has been suppressed by the cowboys and fishermen, which made old Dulles very unhappy. He wants to prove his value. Chapter 538. At this time, Zhang Hai did not know about Ai Xiaoxi's troubles on the other side of the earth. In fact, even if Zhang Hai knew about it, he might not say anything. After all, he and Ai Xiaoxi were not in a relationship yet, so he was a little tangled. The most important thing for them to do now was to harvest the grapes in the manor as soon as possible. With yesterday's experience, Zhang Hai and the others improved their speed again today, and the effect was very good. The steps had been introduced yesterday, so Zhang Hai and the others only needed to follow yesterday's steps. In the morning, Zhang Hai and the others had harvested almost 1/8 of the grapes. It seemed that it would take less than 5 days for Zhang Hai and the others to harvest all the grapes. After lunch, it was time for Delina and the others to step on the grapes again. However, compared to yesterday's enthusiasm, they were much calmer today. After all, this was not a very fun thing to do. Not only were the grapes very slippery when they stepped on them, but the seeds were also very clumsy. Naturally, they had to step on the grapes barefoot. Otherwise, did you think they were stepping on them with shoes? Yesterday they were playing. Today they were working. There was a big difference between playing and working. Fortunately, the 4 girls did not complain much. Even Bernice, who Jiang Hai thought was most likely to go on strike, finished her work. After stepping on the grapes, Dulles Gerard and O'Connor Murphy carried them to a distance. They sprinkled the grapes with baking powder, covered them with a layer of something, and waited for them to ferment. They were experts in this kind of thing. Unknowingly, after the lunch break, the afternoon began to busy again. Fortunately, everyone knew that it was time to harvest the grapes yesterday, so it was not evening yet. Robbins Garcia and Edouard Anderson had already taken their men to leave early. They also called back the women who worked in the town to help pick the grapes and peel the grapes. Of course, the work of stepping on the grape juice was still done by the 4 of them. This was because Gerald Dulles required girls who had not fought before, which also represented purity. Therefore, those women couldn't do it, and Dana and the others' identities were a little awkward. After all, they used to work in the service industry. Everyone in the manor knew this. Although their bodies had been repaired by Jiang Hai, they couldn't let others know about this. Therefore, they were still eating grapes. After everything was settled, although it was not like last night when it was already past 10 o'clock, it was not early tonight either. It was already past 8 o'clock at night. Winthrop was located in the easternmost part of the United States. In fact, it was somewhat similar to the 3 northeastern provinces of Huaxia. The sun rose very early in the morning, and the sky turned dark very late at night. Although the United States had different time zones, Eastern American time was still based on Washington's time. Therefore, it was already very dark at around 8 o'clock. But fortunately, with yesterday's matter as a foundation, today was a lot more relaxed. Jiang Hai deliberately took out some ingredients and let everyone have a good meal at his place before returning home. Jiang Hai and the others had been busy the whole day, so naturally, they were sweating. Therefore, they all ran to the hot spring to take a bath. This was now a regular activity for them. Lying in the hot spring, Jiang Hai didn't have any needs today. Although it was inevitable that Jiang Hai would rely on his little left and right every morning and night when he slept, after all, he had just fought with Aphrodite last night. Although he still had some desires, he wasn't particularly strong. He just lay in the hot spring and casually watched TV. But at this moment, a soft sound of footsteps reached his ears. Listening to these soft footsteps, Jiang Hai knew that it was definitely a woman's footsteps. Thinking about what happened with Aphrodite yesterday, Jiang Hai smiled. It seemed that she was more anxious than him. She was still bathing, and she came over again. Before Jiang Hai could speak, a towel with a hint of body fragrance covered his face. Shoo! Hearing someone tell him to be quiet, Jiang Hai cooperated and didn't speak. Then there was the sound of water. Jiang Hai knew that another person had entered the hot spring. Originally, it was just a little standing, but at this time, it stood taller. And after that person entered the hot spring, it took the initiative to lie down just as Jiang Hai thought. But just as the 2 sides came into contact, Jiang Hai's body suddenly froze because this feeling seemed a little different. So he instantly took down the towel covering his face, and the situation in front of him gave him a fright. The movements and shape were exactly the same as he imagined, but the person was different. Because the person lying in front of him at this time was not the Aphrodite he imagined, but Dinah Taylor. Why is it you? As soon as he saw Dinah Taylor, Jiang Hai immediately called out. But just as he spoke normally, he felt that it wasn't good to speak so loudly, so he immediately lowered his voice and asked Dinah Taylor. Why can't it be me? Don't worry, everything I have is yours. Don't have any psychological burden. Dinah Taylor raised her head and glanced at Jiang Hai. Her eyes narrowed, and after speaking lightly, she continued to bury her head in her work. SSS, you should understand what I'm thinking. I didn't think about developing with you like this. Looking up, Jiang Hai felt that the method was completely different from Aphrodite's, and he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. But we have the intention of developing with you like this. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Dinah Taylor continued. But this is unfair to you. I didn't have such thoughts when I saved you. Jiang Hai pressed Dinah's head and let her temporarily leave him. He looked at her and said seriously. Dinah also looked at Jiang Hai seriously. I understand what you mean, but now is not the time to think about this. I know what the situation between you and Aphrodite is. Since Aphrodite can do it, then I can naturally do it too. Looking at Zhang Hai, Dinah's eyes flashed with a trace of stubbornness and seriousness. But you have to think about it carefully. If we do this, then you have no way out. I can't give you any status. You may end up alone in this manner in the future. Hearing Dinah Taylor's words, Zhang Hai sighed. Sometimes, it was not a good thing to meet a girl who was too stubborn. For example, now he was very embarrassed. We didn't have any way out. Originally, we didn't have a way out. From the first day we entered your manor, we were already yours. Our hearts, our bodies, and even our souls belonged to you. We didn't have any other choice, but in your eyes, we still had other choices. If we could stay by your side for the rest of our lives, that would be enough for us. Dana said seriously while looking at Zhang Hai. She had never discussed these things with Zhang Hai before, but she knew that with Aphrodite's personality, there were some things that she wouldn't be able to say out loud. Thus, she could only let her say it and let Zhang Hai understand their intentions. Looking at Dinah's I'm very serious face, Zhang Hai really didn't know what to say. Stop dawdling. If you're a man, then fight. Seeing that Zhang Hai was still a little hesitant, Dinah also pressed her body completely against Zhang Hai's side. Her face was pressed against Zhang Hai's face, and her small mouth came to Zhang Hai's ear. She whispered as she exhaled. When she finished speaking, she purposely sucked on Zhang Hai's earlobe. Zhang Hai had never experienced this kind of action before. He couldn't help but feel a chill run down his spine. His originally clear eyes turned red at this time. A dragon's nature was like that. Now that the arrow was on the bow, he had no choice but to release it. Zhang Hai's hands exerted force and directly swapped Dinah Taylor out of the hot spring. Fortunately, he was still conscious and knew that he couldn't have her here. This would be too unfair to her. He carried her into the changing room. Looking at Dinah Taylor, whose body had been dyed pink, Zhang Hai also pounced on her. As for Dinah Taylor, she gritted her teeth and tried not to let herself make a sound. Originally, she thought that fighting was very painful. This was related to her previous experience, but for Zhang Hai, she was willing to accept this kind of pain. But when she felt Zhang Hai, she knew that the pain was only at the beginning. As Zhang Hai's fighting escalated, she found that this was the feeling of fighting, which made her endlessly addicted. If she had known that fighting was like this, she might have run to Zhang Hai long ago. It seemed that she had to be more proactive in the future. This way, she could maintain a good relationship with Zhang Hai and feel this different feeling. Why not? At this time, outside a special ward in South Korea's 3-star Seoul hospital, a middle-aged man with a gloomy face pushed open the door of the ward in front of him and walked in. The moment he entered, he happened to see a young man who looked like this middle-aged man sitting on the only bed in the ward, holding the hand of a nurse and saying something. In addition to a silly smile, the nurse would deliberately guide his hand to unconsciously rub her exposed thigh or plump upper body. After hearing the sound of the door opening, both of them were shocked, but after seeing the person who came in addition to the horror on their faces, there was also a trace of embarrassment. As for the little nurse, she directly broke away from the man's hand and respectfully retreated to the side. As for the young man lying here, he also smiled and propped up his body, calling out, "Dad! It seems that you are fine." Looking at the young man lying on the bed, the middle-aged man said faintly, "How can I be fine? Dad, I was beaten up. You have to avenge me." Looking at the middle-aged man's understatement, the young man couldn't help but shout at the middle-aged man. His shout was quite miserable. Chapter 539. You still have the nerve to shout? Do you know who your opponent is this time? Hearing the young man scream, the middle-aged man didn't care. He still looked at his only son calmly. He took off the glasses on his face, wiped them gently, and said calmly. Hearing what he said, the young man's face flashed with a trace of pride. I have already checked. That guy is called Zhang Hai. He is a Hua Xia. Now, he opened a farm in the United States. He sells some beef and raises some fish. He doesn't have any background in politics or business. Looking at the middle-aged man, the young man said with a gloomy face. Obviously, he was beaten up by a country bumpkin. This made him very unhappy, very unhappy. Oh, you are not too stupid. You know to investigate the other party in advance. Not bad, not bad. You have made some progress. But do you know who the woman beside him is? Hearing the young man's words, the middle-aged man was a little surprised. Then, he nodded slightly with satisfaction. But then, he changed the topic and asked, "That woman?" Hearing the middle-aged man's words, the young man couldn't help but think of the blonde woman with blue eyes. He didn't know what happened, but his heart that was originally filled with anger became hot and dry. Indeed, in his opinion, Perwalton was quite seductive, especially that queen style. He really wanted to hold her in his arms and dote on her. But now, listening to his father's words, it seemed that the woman was not simple. Yes, if you want to deal with Jiang Hai, that woman is actually the biggest obstacle. Do you know who that woman is? Her name is Perwalton. Seeing that his son was a little confused, the middle-aged man continued to say indifferently, "Walton? That Walton?" As the crown prince of a super-wealthy family, the first thing he did when he was sensible was to memorize the name list of the members of each family. At least, he absolutely couldn't miss out on the family name list. It was because you had to know that if you accidentally provoked someone outside, who knew what kind of family they were from. Only by knowing yourself and your enemy could you win 100 battles. Although this guy was young and frivolous, he was not a fool, nor was he a pure playboy. He knew a lot. "Yes, it's that Walton," the middle-aged man said calmly as he looked at the young man. "As is this." Hearing the middle-aged man's words, the young man couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. He really didn't expect that beautiful woman to be a member of the Volvo family. He was also shocked at that time. Although the Samsung Group belonged to South Korea, it had a lot of influence in the world. In the latest Fortune 500 companies, Samsung was ranked 13th. It could be said that it was one of the strongest private companies. In the whole of Asia, there were very few people who could compete with it. However, the Walton family's Walmart was ranked first in the world. They were ranked first in the world's top 500. The second was Huaxia Oil Company, the third was Royal Dutch Shell Oil Company, the fourth was Huaxia Oil and Natural Gas Group, and the fifth was ExxonMobil, which was the company controlled by the Rockefeller family. The sixth was British Petroleum Company, the seventh was Huaxia Imperial Power Grid Company, the eighth was German Daegang, the ninth was Japan's Toyota, the 10th was Switzerland's Glencore, the 10th was France's Total, the 12th was the United States Chevron, and the 13th was Samsung. But now, he was ranked 13th. He had offended the number one family, and the political relationship between South Korea and the United States was taken into account. It seemed that he had caused trouble for the family. Fortunately, the Walton you have offended is just an ordinary member of the Walton family. I heard that her mother is an illegitimate daughter of the current Walton family. She was brought into the family when she was 8 years old. Although she has some talent, her background is limited. The Walton family will not go to war with us for such a woman. But if you dare to do anything else, then I can't say for sure. Offending the Walton family was not easy to solve. The Walton family was famous in the United States for being low-key and protective. The only good news was that this Walton was not an important member of the Walton family. She was just an illegitimate daughter, so they would not go to war with Samsung. However, if the Three Stars Edge was still unwilling to give up, then their tempers would not be so good. I understand. Hearing his father's words, the young man lowered his head, but he was not satisfied. "I know you are not satisfied, but this Jiang Hai must not be touched. The information you have investigated is still too little. This is some information about him. I hope you will give up after you see it. From today onwards, you will stay in South Korea. Without my order, you are not allowed to leave this place." Looking at his son, the middle-aged man could not possibly not know what his son was thinking. He took out a piece of paper from his pocket and threw it in front of the young man. After that, he turned and left. After his father turned and left, the young man picked up the paper in front of him and looked at it. If Jiang Hai was here, he would be very surprised because the information on this piece of paper included almost all of his information, including his background, his situation in the past few years, his grades when he graduated from high school, and so on. Everything was written on it. Apart from that, the things that happened in the past year were also written on it. In fact, anyone who was interested could find out if they did a little research. Whether it was the top-grade beef sold in the Chi family's restaurant in China, the top-grade beef sold in Walmart Sam's Club, or the beef sold in Shanghai supermarkets, these beef were all provided by Jiang Hai. This was also the reason why Walton was with Jiang Hai. It seemed that this guy was a country bumpkin, but it seemed that this guy's strength was not to be underestimated. In addition to selling beef, this guy seemed to have a close relationship with the royal family of Dubai. Dufayman were Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum. It seemed that he also had some connections in China. Although Zhang Hai was more than a level lower than Samsung, this guy's strength was also very deep. Not only was he related to Huaxia, but he was also related to the Middle East. He also had a certain amount of protection in the United States. If Samsung wanted to mess with him, it would not be difficult, but Samsung would have to be prepared to pay tens of billions of dollars. Tens of billions of dollars was not even 1/10 of Samsung's total assets. However, this money was clearly not something he could use. His father probably did not have the authority to do so. Although Samsung belonged to the Lee family, it also belonged to South Korea. Whether it was the government or the directors, no one would allow him to take revenge on Zhang Hai. Moreover, the person who had authority over Samsung was not him, but his grandfather. Thinking of this, the young man sighed and leaned his head on the pillow. He was unwilling, but he could only suppress his anger for now. He would think about the specifics later. As if she could see that the young man was not in a good mood, the nurse who had been standing next to him quietly left the room. Although she had heard a lot of news, she knew that if she dared to leak this news, she would not be far from the day she would be finished. This was South Korea, and the Samsung Lee family was in charge here. Even the president of a country had to act according to their wishes, let alone a little nurse. She did not want to be found by others in the Han River one day. If that happened, she would not even be able to find a place to cry. By the time Li Zhihao reacted, the nurse had already been gone for a long time. Li Zhihao just curled his lips at the young man's lack of appreciation. He could not deal with Zhang Hai now, but in South Korea, he was still the well-deserved crown prince. Since he was unhappy in his heart, he had to vent this resentment. If a man wanted to vent his resentment, the simplest way was to find a woman. Therefore, after he made a phone call, many young and beautiful women came to his ward not long after. The middle-aged man was naturally aware of his son's actions. However, as long as his son didn't provoke those big forces and stir up trouble, he wouldn't care if his son messed around in the country. This could be considered another form of compensation. At this time, Zhang Hai did not know what happened in South Korea. In fact, ever since he beat up Li Zhihao, he did not care too much about this guy's revenge. Samsung did have a big reputation, but they were also very afraid of scandals. Look at those conglomerates and those families. If something happened, it would be sensational news. Zhang Hai was betting that this guy would not dare to find trouble with him. Of course, he did not care if he lost the bet because he had the strength. If it was in South Korea, the situation would be uncertain. However, he probably would not go to South Korea in this life. If they had the ability, let them come to the United States and Huaxia to find trouble with him because he would probably only stay here permanently. However, if they dared to come to the United States and Huaxia to find trouble with him, Zhang Hai would let them know that he was not someone to be trifled with. With this year's operation, Zhang Hai could be considered to be deeply rooted now. If others wanted to touch him, they would be linked together. At least, no one dared to find trouble with him so blatantly. With the support of the Walton family, the royal family of Dubai, and the imperial court of Huaxia, he could not touch some of the big shots, but he could deal with the little devils in an instant. After taking a good shower, Zhang Hai returned to his room, lay on the white jade bed, and gradually fell asleep with his quilt. On the other side, Dana Taylor, who had just finished fighting with Zhang Hai, also walked back to her villa. Chapter 540. Bang! With the sound of the door closing, Dinah Taylor moved her slightly hesitant steps and walked upstairs. Originally, Zhang Hai wanted to let her sleep at his place for the night, or send her back himself, but she didn't agree. Instead, she stubbornly walked back by herself. Fortunately, Zhang Hai also knew about her situation, so after the battle ended, he used his aura to treat her. Tomorrow, she may recover to her original state, but it would still hurt a little when she walks now. Hey, Dinah, where did you go? I couldn't find you anywhere, and you didn't pick up the phone. I thought you came back first. Hearing the sound of the door closing, Aphrodite also walked out of the room on the second floor. She couldn't help but ask in annoyance as she watched Dana Taylor slowly walk up the stairs. Dana Taylor smiled awkwardly when she heard her words. I didn't do anything, hee hee. Dinah Taylor whispered when she saw Aphrodite's concerned gaze. Really? Hearing her words, Aphrodite couldn't help but cross her arms and ask with a strange expression. Her scrutinizing gaze made Dinah Taylor quite uncomfortable. Okay, my friend, I'll tell you the truth. Looking at Aphrodite's gaze, Dinah Taylor raised her hand helplessly and looked at her with a serious expression. In fact, they lived together and were like sisters, so it was better to talk about some things. If they were to bump into each other one day, it would be quite awkward. Just now Jung and I, Dinah Taylor raised her eyebrows at Aphrodite and blinked her big eyes. I know. What do I know? You and Jung fought? Hearing Dinah's words, Aphrodite looked like she had lived for a long time. Hey, what's with that expression? We agreed to give ourselves to Jung. Yesterday, you and Jung. I saw it all, you little pervert. Dinah Taylor couldn't help but wrinkle her nose when she saw Aphrodite's expression. Oh my god, you and Jung Hai actually fought. Well, actually, I'm not trying to stop you and Jung Hai, it's just that. Well, this is rather sudden. Apart from you, is there anyone else? Looking at Dinah Taylor, Aphrodite looked at her and asked, her face full of questions. I don't think so. If I hadn't seen you and Jung Hai yesterday, I wouldn't have gone to see him today. But you're really too much. Jung Hai. Well, he's so comfortable, but you actually enjoyed it alone. You're a bad woman. As she spoke, Dinah Taylor walked up the stairs to the second floor with an intoxicated expression on her face. All right. I knew I wouldn't be able to hide this from you guys for long. Do as you please. Raising her hand, Aphrodite said helplessly. Although she was the oldest among the girls, her personality was very delicate. By the way, do you have any medicine that can prevent you from falling for it? Looking at Aphrodite's appearance, Dinah Taylor couldn't help but smile, and then walked to the door of her room. But before going in, she suddenly turned her head and asked Aphrodite. No, I didn't buy that thing. Hearing Dinah's words, Aphrodite, who was about to leave, stopped, then shrugged and said somewhat helplessly. Hearing what she said, Dinah on the other side also curled her lips. When Jung Hai was with you, didn't he wear a raincoat? What should we do then? When she peeked at Aphrodite yesterday, she clearly saw the details of the battle between Jung Hai and her. Now she couldn't help but ask worriedly. If it's true, then give birth. Jung Hai likes children very much. Hearing Dana's words, Aphrodite saw through this much more clearly than Dana and said with an indifferent expression. But given our identities, how awkward would it be if we really had a child? Dinah also felt a little helpless when she heard Aphrodite's words. She moved closer to Aphrodite and whispered to her. This matter was indeed not easy to resolve. Just listen to Jung. We don't need to have too many ideas of our own, understand? Looking at Dinah Taylor, Aphrodite said seriously. Hearing Aphrodite say this, Dinah Taylor also bit her lip. This was the only way. Don't worry, Jung Hai knows what to do. If you can have it, then you have to do it as soon as possible. While we still haven't decided on the hostess, if you have already determined your position, then it will be a good thing for you. Seeing that Dinah was still a little worried, Aphrodite patted her shoulder. Sometimes she thought too much. Okay. Hearing Aphrodite's words, Dinah also thought it through. If she could really have a baby of her own with Jung Hai, then it would be quite interesting. Thinking of this, not only was she no longer worried, she was even a little eager to give it a try. She turned around and walked into the room. Looking at her back, Aphrodite couldn't help but sigh. Jung's self-control is still too poor, but should I also seek benefits for the sisters? Aphrodite muttered softly as she watched Dinah Taylor walk in. Speaking of which, Aphrodite and the other 10 girls were perhaps in the most awkward position in the manor. To tell the truth, apart from their admiration and gratitude towards Jung Hai, there was nothing else they could do about it. They were quite satisfied with this place. Here they could eat well, live well, and work was easy. Most importantly, they had respect and dignity. These were things they did not have before. Of course, the most important thing was that they could speak. They had achieved all these things here. It could be said that Jung Hai was their backbone, and Jung Hai was their master. Just like Perwalton's position in Cheryl Lee's heart, Jung Hai's position was even higher. However, Their identities were also the most awkward. They were willing to give and sacrifice everything for Jiang Hai, but because of their original identities, they weren't even qualified to be Jiang Hai's mistresses, let alone be the mistress of this manor. Now they could stay here because Jiang Hai was still in charge of this manor. What if, by chance, there was a new mistress here in the future, and the mistress told Jiang Hai that she didn't want them to stay here? For people like her and Dinah who had some relations with Jiang Hai could protect them, but what about the others? After all, Jiang Hai wasn't young anymore, and it seemed that some things should be put on the agenda. In the past, she had been taking her time. It wasn't that she wasn't anxious, but that she didn't know what to do. But now, it seemed that perhaps she could slowly arrange for some girls to go to Jiang Hai's place. This would also be in line with their inner thoughts. With this thought in mind, Aphrodite slowly entered the land of dreams, and Jiang Hai also slept very comfortably tonight. After a night, early the next morning, Jiang Hai and the others continued to cut grapes. This was also the only work that they had to do recently. After 2 days of practice, they could be considered familiar with the task today. They cut the grapes quickly and completely. Bunches of grapes were placed in baskets, waiting for noon to pick these grapes out for the girls to step on. Although he had already decided that he wouldn't drink red wine in the future, Jiang Hai was still quite interested in making money with this red wine. In fact, there were a lot of things in food that couldn't be said openly. Once it was said openly, there was almost no way to eat anything. For example, this red wine was stepped on. Did you think it was Xueqi's noodle food? This was especially true for some handmade steamed bun shops, as well as the wheaten food near the northwest region. Without a noodle mixer, they were basically stepped on by women. Some were even stepped on by men. But without knowing it, it tasted pretty good. Many crayfish were raised in sewage ponds. Some people said that these crayfish grew up eating rotten human flesh, but this was nonsense. Although there were a lot of people in Xueqi, when people died, most of them were cremated instead of thrown into rivers or sewers. The number of people who died in Xueqi wasn't enough to raise these crayfish, but it was true that they grew up eating garbage and mud. In addition, stinky tofu, roasted gluten, spicy hot pot, teppanyaki squid, rice noodles, and the like could all be problematic. For example, candied haws and roasted sweet potatoes were just slightly dirtier snacks, so there was no problem. Of course, the premise of these things being delicious was that they weren't exposed. Once they were exposed, there was no way to eat them. Unknowingly, Jiang Hai had already cut a basket of grapes. Just as he was about to move the basket of grapes into the winery, Dinah Taylor took the initiative to come over and help. Although Jiang Hai wouldn't have a problem moving a basket of grapes by himself, he wouldn't refuse a girl's help. What's more, something had happened between him and this girl yesterday. After moving the grapes into the winery, Jiang Hai was just about to go out, but he was stopped by Dinah Taylor. Then, after gesturing to Jiang Hai, she pulled him to the other side of the winery. What's the matter? Seeing that they had come to this place without people, Jiang Hai couldn't help but ask curiously. However, Dinah Taylor didn't answer Jiang Hai. Instead, she looked at him, held his face and kissed him. When their lips touched, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be stunned. He immediately pulled her away and looked around nervously. You're crazy. If you want to do that, we'll talk about it at night. Deep down, Jiang Hai was still a very traditional person. Looking at the wilderness outside, the most important thing was that someone could come here at any time. He couldn't help but feel a little panicked. We can't wait until night time. If you want to get away quickly, then get rid of me as soon as possible. Looking at Jiang Hai, Dinah Taylor said coquettishly. Then she squatted down and unbuttoned a few buttons on her clothes. Looking at the scene in front of him, coupled with Dinah Taylor's early harassment, Jiang Hai couldn't stay calm in an instant. After looking around, he didn't care so much. After a few minutes, he helped Dinah Taylor up. The battle began. Chapter 541. While Jiang Hai and Dinah Taylor were behind his winery, in a secluded place with no cameras, something related to Jiang Hai was happening in the Middle East, which was 8 hours ahead of them. Speaking of the Middle East, the only person related to Jiang Hai was Du Feimin. Yes, this matter was also related to Du Feimin. Since he had reached an agreement with Jiang Hai to cooperate, he had bought a batch of cows back. There were 10 cows in total, and each cow was worth $1 million. The U.S. officials had come forward to settle the issue. After all, they were only Angus cows. The U.S. Customs did not know what was special about Zhonghai's cows, so after a quarantine, the cows were allowed to leave the country. Then, Du Feynman directly flew the cows back to Dubai. After arriving in Dubai, he began to send people to study it. It turned out that after so many days, the research was almost complete. What Zhonghai said was not wrong at all. Since these cows left Zhonghai's manor, because of the lack of spiritual energy, they were unable to nourish themselves. There were no problems for the first 3 days, but after 3 days, the marbled beef gradually disappeared. Cows were living creatures, just like humans. If humans went to the gym every day to exercise, they could indeed develop a body of muscles. However, when one stopped exercising one day, the muscles could not be maintained, and they would become a piece of fat again. The same was true for Zhonghai's cows. Eating grass with spirit energy every day would make their bodies mutate and become exceptionally perfect. However, once they stopped eating grass, the fat in the marble would gradually be digested. The marble disappeared and turned into ordinary beef. But generally speaking, this could last for a long time. However, these cows did not last very long without pasture. A week later, which was 10 days after the cows arrived in Dubai, although they were still abnormally strong, they were only left with 12% of the premium grade A frost beef, which could be obtained after the slaughter at the beginning, and this ratio continued to decrease. As for the grass he brought back, well, it survived, but it had become ordinary grass. According to Zhonghai's estimation, the beef would become 5% in the end. It was guaranteed that there would be such beef, but that was all. Du Feynman did not wait for the 5% to decide whether to cooperate with Zhonghai. Today, when the ratio dropped to 10%, he had already told his father about it. Du Feynman's father was the son of a Dubai sheikh. Although he did not inherit the throne in the end, he inherited a lot of development rights and oil. However, they all understood that oil was still very valuable now, but no one could say for sure in the future. Dubai was the best tourist city in the world, and they decided to do more in this area. However, what happened later was clear to everyone. Dubai almost went crazy and almost went bankrupt. In the end, it was Abu Dhabi and other countries that helped to settle this matter. Since then, they had been actively looking for ways to change and make money. Here, we need to talk about the political system of Dubai. Some people said that Dubai was not a country, but a city. This was not wrong, but it was also not wrong to say that Dubai was a country, not a city. The country that Dubai belonged to, on the surface, should belong to the United Arab Emirates. Its full name was the United Arab Emirates. Here we need to explain that this country was not a complete country like Xueqi, Britain, France, the United States, Germany, and so on. This country was actually a combination of many small countries. In fact, this was not quite right. Although these countries were nominally a country, whether it was in terms of politics, military, or geography, they were 7 completely different countries. The United Arab Emirates was formed by the merger of 7 chiefdoms, and the so-called highest organization was the parliament formed by the 7 chiefdoms. However, each of the 7 chiefdoms could not control the other. If there was an invasion, they would unite against the invaders. Normally, they were like friendly neighbors. You developed your own business and didn't need to care about others. Others also developed their own business and didn't need to care about others. There was no unified command, let alone a common leader. The 7 sheikdoms formed by the United Arab Emirates were the world's most powerful and richest financial group, Abu Dhabi, which was also the capital of the United Arab Emirates. Next was the Dubai Emirate, which had the largest and most populous city. Then there was Sharjah, the holy city of the Middle East. Asman, the guardian of the Persian Gulf. Kaifeng, the half-bird sheik with the smallest population. Ras Haima and Fujairah. These tribal countries usually managed their own affairs and were not subordinate to each other. If one had to find a more similar description, it would be like the imperial court and the Thai province. Although the imperial court was China to the outside, the imperial court could not control the Thai province internally. After Du Feynman in Dubai told this news to his father also told the royal family. Afterward, the main members of the royal family gathered together for a meeting. Regarding Du Feynman's ability, the current Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, Xueqi was the name of Du Feynman's father, and the current sheikh was Xueqi's brother, decided that they could give it a try. Although Dubai was short of money now, it was backed by Abu Dhabi, an existence that could burn US dollars like wood for warmth. For the royal family, they did not care about hundreds of trillions. Moreover, Du Feynman only wanted a piece of land in the beginning, plus some herders, security guards, and cattle. These things were not worth much in the eyes of the royal family in Dubai. If it was really like what Du Feynman said, as long as the profits were good, they could make billions or even tens of billions of dollars a year. They were very tempted. They liked projects like this that didn't require a lot of investment, but the profits were considerable. Soon after, they agreed to Du Feynman's request. After obtaining the consent of the royal family, Du Feynman had already studied where to get a pasture. Although the Middle East was a place dominated by deserts, because most of the pasture was provided by Zhang Hai's manor, the pasture here did not need to be too troublesome. When a national organization was ready to do something, it was very fast. Enclosure of land, purchase of cattle, and manpower could be completed very quickly. At this time, Du Feynman also called Zhang Hai. At this time, Zhang Hai had just finished his battle with Dana. He was eating to replenish his energy when he received Du Feynman's call. Du Feynman naturally did not call Zhang Hai to exchange pleasantries. He wanted to tell Zhang Hai when he was free to come over and take a look at Dubai. He wanted to know if the land he encircled was reliable for raising cattle. But how could Zhang Hai know about this? It was only because of the miraculous spiritual qi in his body that he was able to achieve what he had today. He didn't know anything about grass seeds, pastures, cattle seeds, and so on. But at this time, he couldn't say that he was completely different. He just casually said that the manor had been very busy recently, and that he would talk about it after this period of time. He fooled around with this matter, but he knew that this time, his business was close. As long as the cattle farm in Dubai was built, he could earn 300 to 400 million a year just by selling pasture here. This was a regular income. He could earn $2 billion a year from selling cattle, $2 billion more from selling fish, and 300 to 400 million from selling pasture. Zhang Hai's annual income was almost $5 billion. This was just 1 year's income. Zhang Hai's expenses were mainly taxes, labor, and so on. Although this was still a far cry from going into the sea to salvage sunken ships, those sunken ships were just night grass and windfall for Zhang Hai. A horse would not get fat without night grass, and a man would not get rich without windfall. This was indeed a very correct saying. But if a horse only ate night grass, and a man only had windfall, it would not last long. How could one not wet their shoes if they walked by the river often? If he walked by the river often at night and was targeted by someone one day and turned into a ghost, Zhang Hai's secret would not be able to be protected. What would he do then? Therefore, sometimes, not all kinds of money could be earned. It was better to think clearly about some things. Zhang, who called you? That Middle Eastern rich man? When Zhang Hai hung up the phone, Bernice, who had just stepped on a pot of grapes, couldn't help but gasp and walk to Zhang Hai's side, and asked curiously. Zhang Hai had just returned for a few days, and that Middle Eastern rich man wanted to ask him to go out again? Oh, it's indeed that Middle Eastern rich man. That guy bought a large ranch in Dubai and wants to import our pasture. Hearing Bernice's words, Zhang Hai also smiled and said to her. He also knew what she was worried about. Grass can be sold for money? When Zhang Hai talked about this last time, only he and Du Feynman knew about it, so although Bernice was curious, she really didn't think that Zhang Hai could even sell grass for money. It seemed that this land was an out-and-out treasure. Originally, when she learned that Zhang Hai spent 280 million to buy such a piece of land, she wanted to laugh at Zhang Hai, but now it seemed that not to mention 280 million, even if it was 8 billion or 28 billion, it would not be excessive. Hearing her words, Zhang Hai chuckled. It was really not easy to explain that grass can be sold for money, so he remained silent. By the way, are you interested in going to Dubai to play? Looking at the surprised Bernice, Zhang Hai said with a smile while peeling grapes. Speaking of which, he really hasn't been to Dubai. Although he is unlikely to guide Du Feynman to build a ranch, if it's just for fun, he is still quite interested in this place. Chapter 542. Dubai. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Bernice couldn't help but blink. To be honest, she had never been to this place. She had only heard of it before, but she had never been there. After all, she was too young when she was young. Later, she grew up and went to school. After graduating from university, she set up a research institute to study Little Ya's condition. Little Ya couldn't go anywhere, so she naturally couldn't go anywhere either. So she had only heard of Dubai before, but she had never been there. After all, it was the Middle East, a desert. Little Ya would die if she went there. But now Little Ya's body was much better than before. If she went there to play, she would have to prepare some sunscreen. Thinking of this, Bernice's eyes flashed with a hint of curiosity. Then when are we going? Bernice's character was also very impetuous. Now that she was interested in Dubai, she wanted to immediately ask Zhang Hai when they were going. But after listening to her words, Zhang Hai smiled. Let's see if it's winter. It's too hot to go now, and there are still things here that haven't been done. Looking at her, Zhang Hai chuckled, and then said slowly. Indeed, it was still summer now. Going to the Middle East now was really looking for trouble. Moreover, the most important thing was that Zhang Hai was going to the Middle East to play, not to give pointers to do Feynman on the ranch. Aphrodite, who was sitting on the other side, looked at Zhang Hai, who was talking and laughing with Bernice. The idea she had last night quietly emerged at this time. She glanced at Dinah Taylor, who looked a little tired after coming back. She didn't need to ask to know what this guy was doing when Zhang Hai disappeared in the morning. Although she was a little resentful of Dinah Taylor in her heart, as the eldest sister, she had to think about the others. Thinking of this, she couldn't help but look at the third oldest among them, Hilda Leonard. Hilda Leonard was actually the same age as Dinah Taylor. They were both 20 years old, but she was 3 months younger than Dinah Taylor. Therefore, she was the third oldest girl here. Compared to the silent Aphrodite and the energetic Dana, this girl was much more shy. Usually, she didn't speak and just stayed in the corner obediently. When someone asked her a question, she would answer. However, if she felt awkward or sensitive, she would run away. If she didn't run away, her body would also turn red. She was truly a very shy girl. According to Zhang Hai's understanding, the reason she escaped from the orphanage was not only because she didn't have enough to eat, but also because a volunteer at the orphanage often hit her. And the girl who led the way to escape was the person who always protected her. So when the girl was about to leave, she followed her. But after leaving, she knew what hell was. Fortunately, she didn't sink into it for too long and was rescued by Zhang Hai. She wasn't so numb. Usually, Aphrodite and Hilda were relatively close. After all, she was the eldest sister among these girls. But apart from Aphrodite, Hilda was only slightly closer to her roommate, Paige Hall. Hilda, I'm going to the toilet. Come with me. Thinking of this, Aphrodite put down the bunch of grapevines in her hand and said to Hilda beside her. Hearing Aphrodite's words, although Hilda was stunned for a moment, she still nodded. After quickly peeling the remaining grapes, she wiped her hands on her apron and left with Aphrodite. After the two left the hall, they went to the women's bathroom next door. But just as Hilda was about to walk into one of the partitions, Aphrodite pulled her into one of the partitions. Seeing her action, Hilda's face suddenly turned red and she couldn't help but look at Aphrodite with some confusion. She didn't understand what Aphrodite was doing. Shoo, what I said to you, don't tell anyone else for the time being. Looking at Hilda's puzzled expression and the light blue eyes that were blinking at her, Aphrodite gestured to her and then said in a low voice, "Okay." Hearing what Aphrodite said, Hilda hesitated for a moment and nodded. She knew that Aphrodite wouldn't harm her. "Let me ask you first, do you like Zhang Hai?" Seeing her nod, Aphrodite was temporarily relieved, so she asked. This. Hearing Aphrodite's words, Hilda didn't know what to say. Her whole face was like a monkey's butt, and she looked like she didn't know what to do. Aphrodite was depressed when she saw that she couldn't get anything out of her. If you like him, then you like him. If you don't like him, then you don't like him. Do you want to fight with him? Looking at Hilda's expression, Aphrodite asked with a serious face. Hearing Aphrodite's serious look, Hilda hesitated for a long time before nodding imperceptibly. Let me tell you, with our status, it's not very likely that we'll become Zhang Hai's wives. I think you understand, but we don't want to leave Zhang Hai, so we need Zhang Hai to protect us. Of course, maybe Zhang Hai will protect us in the future, but we can't expect that. I originally thought that Zhang Hai would be more proactive, but now it looks like we need to be more proactive. Dana and I have actually already fought with Zhang Hai. If you want, Then it's your turn today. Aphrodite whispered into Hilda's ear. Hilda almost fainted when she heard Aphrodite's words. She really didn't realize that Aphrodite and Dana had already, with Xueqi. At the same time, when she thought about how Aphrodite said that it would be her turn tonight, she became even more Spartan. Her entire body was very stiff, her face was as red as a tomato, and she lowered her head. She didn't dare to look up at Aphrodite at all. Don't be so shy. Xueqi's personality is a taciturn gourd. If you don't take the initiative, then he won't take the initiative. I just wanted to tell you first that we'll go take a bath tonight, and then. Looking at Hilda, Aphrodite knew that things were already moving forward. After 10 minutes, the two returned here and started to peel grapes again. Looking at Aphrodite's appearance, nothing could be seen, but Hilda kept her head down the entire afternoon. Fortunately, she liked to hide in corners, so she wasn't discovered by others. Finally, unknowingly, it was night time. After calling for dinner, everyone dispersed again. After 3 days of hard work, they had basically harvested 2/3 of the grapes in the vineyard. Of course, this referred to the ripe ones. About a quarter of the grapes were not yet ripe. Or it could be said that about a quarter of the grapes were deliberately not ripened. Those were originally late-ripening varieties. They were used by O'Connor Murphy to make ice wine. The ice wine of the northeastern United States and Canada was also very famous in the world. Therefore, when they were planting, they had already considered the existence of ice wine. These would have to wait until the end of October, when it snowed, to harvest. At the current speed, they would be able to harvest all the grapes if they worked for another day tomorrow, and another half a day the day after tomorrow. After all the grapes were harvested, they would be crushed and then fermented. Xueqi and the others still needed to do some hard work, but that was about it. The main thing still depended on Dulles Gerard and O'Connor Murphy. Xueqi didn't know much about winemaking. After eating dinner and cleaning up, Xueqi and the others went to the hot spring again. After parting ways at the hot spring, Xueqi went to the men's bathroom. However, after lying down, he wasn't in the mood to take a bath. Doing this was addictive, especially for Xueqi. Xueqi originally had the same needs for this as ordinary people, but he wasn't particularly impulsive. However, ever since he got the Dragon Balls, Xueqi found that his control in this area was declining. In the past, he could still resist the temptation, but now, he basically didn't reject anything. The only thing he could control now was not to take the initiative to provoke others. However, if others provoked him, then, every morning, he would trouble write a little. At night, he would also trouble write a little. During the day when he had nothing to do, he would have such thoughts. His physical fitness was 4 times that of ordinary people, so he almost didn't have to worry about the problem of his body being overdrawn. His recovery ability was strong, and his energy was even more powerful. Originally, he only troubled left and right these few days, but Aphrodite and Dana had teased him until he was a little distracted. Therefore, lying in the hot spring, his thoughts drifted to the women's bathroom next door. At this time, at the women's bathroom, seeing that everyone had started to rest, Dana Taylor's eyes turned. She wanted to go ashore. There was no need to say what she wanted to do on the shore. However, just as she was about to leave, Aphrodite pulled her back. Just as she was looking at Aphrodite in confusion, Aphrodite used her chin to point at Hilda, who was not far from her. Seeing Aphrodite's action, Dana Taylor knew that she probably didn't have a chance tonight. Hilda also saw their actions. Her body, which was already red from soaking in the hot spring, couldn't help but become even redder. Under Aphrodite's encouraging gaze, she slowly went ashore. Then, she wrapped a bath towel around herself and walked out of the women's bathroom, looking back every few steps. After hesitating for a while, she finally walked into Xueqi's men's bathroom. As soon as she walked in, she saw Xueqi sitting in the distance. At this time, Xueqi was just sitting there with a golden blade. She didn't know why, but after transforming into a dragon, his tattoo was revealed at this time. It was a mighty dragon with a broad back. Looking at it, Hilda's face became even redder. She could almost hear her own heartbeat, and her pace slowed down a bit. But no matter how soft her footsteps were, Xueqi, who was paying attention to the movements around him, still heard her footsteps. He turned around and saw that Hilda was actually standing there. When she saw Xueqi looking over, Hilda was like a frightened kitten. She squatted down, closed her eyes, and lowered her head, as though Zhang Hai could see her like this. Chapter 543. Hilda. Although they usually don't have much communication, Zhang Hai is still very familiar with these girls around him. Originally, he thought it would be Dana or Aphrodite. Of course, if the two of them came together, Zhang Hai wouldn't care. But how could it be this shy girl? Seeing this, Zhang Hai couldn't help but stand up from the water. After wrapping a bath towel around himself, he walked to Hilda's side, squatted down, and looked at the girl in front of him. Why did you come here? Did you go the wrong way? Looking at Hilda's appearance, Zhang Hai said to her with a smile. No, this also, Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Hilda wanted to say something, but after speaking for a long time, she didn't even have a complete sentence. Zhang Hai listened for a long time and didn't understand what she was saying. I'll send you to the opposite side. Looking at her hesitant appearance, Zhang Hai shook his head and smiled, then was ready to help her and send her to the opposite female bathroom. But when Zhang Hai touched her arm, her hand suddenly grabbed Zhang Hai's wrist, and then Zhang Hai saw her squatting there and taking a few deep breaths. I came here specially. I want to stay by your side, so please do what you did to Aphrodite and Dana. After gathering her courage, Hilda raised her head and looked at Zhang Hai and said, but halfway through, her head lowered again, and then her voice was like a mosquito. Oh, if you want to stay here, no one can drive you away. You don't have to be like Aphrodite and Dana. Although I'm not a good person, I'm not a bad person. I won't force you to do such a thing. Hearing Hilda's words, Zhang Hai didn't know whether to laugh or cry. These girls are thinking too much. These girls know Zhang Hai's secret, so Zhang Hai won't let them leave him easily. Even if they want to leave, it's impossible. If the news about Spirit Chi spreads, then wouldn't Zhang Hai be dead? No, you don't understand. I like you. I really want to be with you. So you don't have to feel burdened. I'm the same as Aphrodite and Dana. We are all, Hearing Zhang Hai's promise, Hilda on the other side breathed a sigh of relief, but then became nervous again. At the same time, she also wanted to give herself to Zhang Hai. This was what she was serious about. Looking at her shy but still stubborn little face, Zhang Hai couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. Since the girl has already said so much, Zhang Hai won't be polite anymore. Have you really thought it through? Their eyes met, and Zhang Hai looked at Hilda, who was well versed in the arts, and asked seriously. Yes. Although she didn't say anything, Hilda nodded firmly. Seeing her like this, Zhang Hai didn't need to say anything more, and directly carried her into the changing room at the side. He untied the shy girl's bath towel, and in an instant, a perfect naked body appeared in front of Zhang Hai. Usually, he really didn't notice that Hilda didn't look too tall, only about 1.65 meters, with blonde hair, blue eyes, and the style of clothes she used to wear was very loose and casual. Now that she appeared in front of Zhang Hai naked, Zhang Hai discovered that she was actually so well endowed, especially her upper body, which should be the most magnificent Zhang Hai has ever seen. This made Zhang Hai a little uncontrollably pounce on her, and feeling Zhang Hai, Hilda also raised her head, biting the towel in an effort to not let herself make a sound, but then Zhang Hai's hand was no longer satisfied with a certain position, and began to slide down. Hilda, it's very trendy here. Is it because we're in the bathroom? Looking at the shy Hilda, Zhang Hai had the feeling of wanting to bully her for the first time. Leaning in her ear, Zhang Hai whispered, please don't bully me. Listening to Zhang Hai's words, Hilda also said to Zhang Hai with a shy face, this is all Hilda's fault, who asked our Hilda to be so cute. Looking at Hilda's appearance, Zhang Hai also leaned forward and whispered to her. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Hilda suddenly turned her head, while gasping for breath, fixed Zhang Hai's head with her hands, and then kissed him heavily. After a long time, their lips parted, and Hilda hugged Zhang Hai's head, letting Zhang Hai's head firmly lean on her chest. If Zhang Hai really likes Hilda, then prove it to me, so that we can stay here with a firm heart. Listening to Hilda's words in his ear, what was there for Zhang Hai to hesitate about? With Zhang Hai's bugle call, the battle once again burned here, and the bath towel that was originally under Hilda's body also showed a color that shouldn't have appeared. I've been a bit depraved recently. Looking at his hand, lying on the white jade bed, Zhang Hai suddenly missed the feeling just now. After the battle in the bathroom, Hilda was not as strong as Dana. Zhang Hai still sent her back to the villa, but originally Zhang Hai wanted to go in and rest, but in the end, Hilda didn't agree. When they arrived outside her villa, she bowed her head to Zhang Hai and quickly ran into the villa. She was still too shy, but such a shy girl gave Zhang Hai a different feeling. In the past 3 days, Zhang Hai had changed 3 different tastes, and to be honest, he liked each of them very much. And today, Hilda's words made Zhang Hai a little irritated, but also a little excited and expectant. Today, Hilda said that if they didn't want to leave, then they could only offer their bodies to Zhang Hai. Although Zhang Hai wouldn't take the initiative to flirt with these girls, Hilda's words still contained a lot of information. She should be referring to Aphrodite and the other 8. Now, Aphrodite, Dana, and Hilda had already been with Zhang Hai. Didn't that mean that Paige, Sheila, Ashiria, Bridget, and Janice also wanted him? After a brief exchange of blows, the desire for battle that had just ended actually felt like it was about to erupt again. I can't be like this, I've fallen. He slapped his face and temporarily expelled his inner thoughts. However, the wretched smile on Zhang Hai's face proved that Zhang Hai's current heart was not as calm as he said. That night, Zhang Hai slept very soundly. He had a dream, a very erotic dream. The next morning, Zhang Hai just woke up, took a shower, changed his clothes, and then went to the vineyard. When they saw Zhang Hai again, Aphrodite and Dana didn't change, but Hilda had been deliberately avoiding Zhang Hai. Zhang Hai also knew that this girl was shy, so he didn't deliberately flirt with her. However, at around 10 o'clock, he had just finished cutting a basket of grapes when Dana came to help Zhang Hai carry the grapes. Zhang Hai and Dana were familiar with this kind of thing. After carrying the grapes into the winery, she pulled Zhang Hai to the hidden place from yesterday. What else was there to say? The battle started unconsciously. You just fought with Hilda last night, and you're still so strong today. Dana said to Zhang Hai as she felt Zhang Hai's attack from behind. She was really relieved that Zhang Hai wouldn't be affected this time. Of course, I'm your master, Zhang Hai said with a smile as he patted Dana's back. Tell me, between me, Aphrodite, and Hilda, who is the best? Dana rolled her eyes at Zhang Hai and asked Zhang Hai seriously. This. Zhang Hai heard her words and was stunned for a moment. It really wasn't easy to say. While fighting, Zhang Hai thought about how to avoid this topic. Looking at Zhang Hai's appearance, Dana couldn't help but frown and glare at Zhang Hai. Then she exerted force, which made Zhang Hai suck in a breath of cold air. At this moment, the phone in Zhang Hai's pocket suddenly rang, which gave him an excuse. Picking up the phone, the person who called was actually AI Xueqi. Zhang Hai actually chatted with AI Xueqi and Feng Yunqin on WeChat every night, but the 3 of them were in the same group. They would tell Zhang Hai about what happened today, and Zhang Hai would also tell them about the evolution of the manor. Walton and Selena Gomez would call or text him from time to time. The relationship between the 3 of them was not as clear as that between Feng Yunqin and AI Xueqi. Now looking at AI Xueqi's phone call, Zhang Hai couldn't help but be stunned. It was 10 o'clock in the morning in the United States, so it should be the night of Hua Xia. Why was she calling him at this time instead of sleeping? But although he was curious, Zhang Hai still picked up the phone. As for Dana, she closed her mouth, but she moved even more fiercely. Feeling Dana's movements, Zhang Hai didn't stop her. This was another indescribable feeling, but it was really good. Hello, Xueqi, what's the matter? Picking up the phone, Zhang Hai asked AI Xueqi on the other side. What are you doing? Will it trouble you? Listening to Zhang Hai's voice, AI Xueqi hesitated and asked. It's okay, I'm just cutting grapes. I'm almost done, just say it. Zhang Hai also said to AI Xueqi. Well, I want to ask, do you have any plans for the Mid-Autumn Festival? Hearing that Zhang Hai had nothing to do, AI Xueqi couldn't help but ponder for a moment, then asked Zhang Hai. Mid-Autumn Festival? I don't seem to have anything to do. Hearing what AI Xueqi said, Zhang Hai remembered that the Mid-Autumn Festival is coming soon. The Mid-Autumn Festival is a day for family reunion, but he hasn't celebrated this festival for 3 years. Chapter 544. That's great. If you are fine, can I trouble you to come back and accompany me? Accompany me home. Hearing Zhang Hai say that he was fine, AI Xiaoxi on the other side of the phone couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. As long as Zhang Hai was fine, she could continue. Accompany you home? What's the matter? Hearing that she wanted him to go back to China, Zhang Hai didn't care, to be honest. However, the premise was that he had to go back to his own home. If he went back to his own home, he would naturally have Fu Yuan and his group of friends to play with him. He certainly wouldn't be bored. But if he had to accompany AI Xiaoxi home, Zhang Hai would be somewhat confused. It's like this. At the beginning, didn't you give me a sum of money? At that time, my family was really in a difficult situation, so I transferred the money to my family. Hearing Zhang Hai's puzzled voice, AI Xiaoxi hesitated, but still explained to Zhang Hai. After all, the money was given to her by Zhang Hai. It was really not good not to say where it went. Oh, you don't have to tell me these things. The money is for you. You can use it freely. Listening to AI Xiaoxi's voice on the phone, Zhang Hai nodded. He had heard about this matter from Feng Yunchen long ago. This was not a big deal. But after my dad and mom got the money, they asked me where the money came from. They were afraid that I had earned it by doing some shady work. At that time, I was also anxious, so I said that the money was given by my boyfriend, which is you, so they accepted the money. But now the Mid-Autumn Festival is coming. They want to see you. I don't know if it's convenient for you? Listening to Zhang Hai's words, AI Xiaoxi was indeed a little touched. Although money couldn't represent a man's love for a woman, a man was willing to spend money on a woman, which proved that she had a certain place in his heart. AI Xiaoxi listened to Zhang Hai's words and knew that she had a place in Zhang Hai's heart. However, it was hard to say how stable this position was, so now she was still a little conflicted. I see. Zhang Hai's first thought upon hearing AI Xiaoxi's words was, I don't want to go. However, even though he didn't want to go, when he thought about how rare it was for Xiaoxi to ask him for a favor, he felt that it wouldn't be good if he didn't go. Most importantly, if he really rejected her, he would be done for with AI Xiaoxi. This was because Zhang Hai had said that he had nothing to do at the moment. It was indeed inappropriate to reject him like this. Please, please. If you come, I will definitely treat you well. Please. Hearing the slight hesitation in Zhang Hai's words, AI Xiaoxi couldn't help but speak to Zhang Hai in a pitiful voice. Hearing her pitiful words, Zhang Hai chuckled. There were two main reasons why he didn't want to go. First, it was because the flight was too long and he was too lazy to sit. Second, it was because if he went, he would be a little embarrassed. However, since AI Xiaoxi had begged him, he couldn't refuse. After all, he did have a relationship with AI Xiaoxi. Okay, I will return home 2 days in advance. Let's talk about it when we meet. Hearing AI Xiaoxi's words, Zhang Hai agreed. It's okay if I'm tired. I'll just treat it as a trip back home. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, AI Xiaoxi was naturally grateful on the other side of the phone. After saying a lot of good things, she hung up the phone. Looking at the hung-up phone, Zhang Hai couldn't help shaking his head. He originally thought that there was nothing to do recently. Now it seemed that even if he didn't look for trouble, trouble would come to him. After hanging up the phone, Xiaoxi started gesturing with all her might. In fact, these days, she had been struggling whether to call Zhang Hai or not. Because she also knew that this was a test. If Zhang Hai didn't want to come back and meet her parents with her, maybe in Zhang Hai's eyes, she was just a toy. If this was the case, then she didn't have to struggle. Maybe she should set her position in her heart earlier. But if Zhang Hai was willing to come back, although she would still struggle, it would be a sweet struggle. Just like now, she was afraid to call, but Zhang Hai still didn't come back. So after a few days, she deliberately chose a time when Feng Yunchen was asleep to call Zhang Hai. But fortunately, the ending was what she wanted in her heart. Although she still struggled with her position, at least it proved that Zhang Hai had her in his heart. Zhang Hai was willing to come back for her and was willing to meet her parents with her. Since Zhang Hai was willing to make such a sacrifice, then it didn't matter if she struggled a little. Holding the phone and looking at Zhang Hai's photo on the screen, AI Xiaoxi couldn't help but feel happy. She was already thinking about how to treat Zhang Hai when he came back. Should she also give her behind to Zhang Hai? Why, are you going back to China? At this time, Zhang Hai didn't know AI Xiaoxi's thoughts. Seeing her hang up the phone, Zhang Hai also put the phone back in his pocket. Because of the phone call just now, although it was exciting, it distracted him. Dana Taylor in front of him also stood up and then squatted in front of Zhang Hai. She asked Zhang Hai while cleaning up. I may go back for a few days at the end of the month. Hearing her words, Zhang Hai also nodded. Mid-Autumn Festival. Speaking of which, he really hadn't celebrated this festival in a long time. Now it seemed that he could go back to China to experience it. Oh, there's still time, but you have to solve all our problems before you leave. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Dana Taylor laughed and once again posed in a new position. The battle continued. Half an hour later, Zhang Hai and Dana, who was walking a little light, returned to the winery. But at this time, the grapes were almost all picked. Zhang Hai rushed to cut a basket of grapes before going back for lunch. During lunch, Zhang Ziyan told everyone about his plans to return to China at the end of the month. Although it was only the beginning of the month, it was better to inform them in advance. Most importantly, he was going to AI Xiaoxi's house this time, so it was inappropriate for him to bring other people along. It was better for them to understand the situation. Mid-Autumn Festival, we haven't celebrated it for a long time. Hearing Zhang Hai say that he was going back to China to celebrate the Mid-Autumn Festival, Bernice couldn't help but be stunned, and then said with a little yearning. That's because you haven't celebrated it for a long time, sister. I celebrated it at home the year before last. Hearing Bernice's words, Xiaoya smiled and said to Bernice. Hearing what she said, Bernice couldn't help but glare at her. Then why don't you come back with me? Then go home and celebrate the Mid-Autumn Festival. After that, we'll come back together. Hearing her words, Zhang Hai thought for a moment and said to her. He didn't know much about Bernice and little Ya's family situation, but he really regarded them as friends. It can even be said that they are members of this manor. If they want to go back, it doesn't matter. Forget it. Let's not go back first. Xiao Ya's condition is still in the maintenance period. I'm afraid that the air or something after returning to China will trigger Xiao Ya's condition. It's better to stay here for the time being. We'll go back during the new year. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Bernice shook her head and said seriously. For her, the most important person in the world was Xiao Ya. Although Xiao Ya's condition was basically stable now, she still hoped that it would be stable for a few more months. Anyway, during the new year, Zhang Hai will also go home, and they can go back together at that time. Well, I shouldn't be away for a few days this time. Hearing Bernice's words, Zhang Hai also nodded. He indeed wouldn't be away for a few days. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Aphrodite couldn't help but ponder for a moment. Just as Dana thought, Aphrodite was still very concerned about whether Zhang Hai would complete her plan or not. Thinking of this, she got up and left to find Page Hall. Now was not the time to rest. She had to arrange the people for the night, and the person who should be doing it today was Page Hall. Compared to Hilda, Page Hall's situation was much better. Although she was very shy when she heard that this was an arrangement to serve in bed, she wasn't as shy as Hilda to the point where she couldn't even hide her face. Instead, she agreed readily. People's personalities were set by God. No one's personality was completely the same, including the personalities of Aphrodite and the others. Aphrodite's personality was calm but very passive. Even without Aphrodite, Zhang Hai also knew Dana Taylor. After interacting with her for 2 days, he could understand that this fellow's personality was bold and unrestrained. Hilda Leonard's personality was shy but very stubborn, which was also what Zhang Hai understood. Page Hall's Huai Gu was decisive and daring. She was a girl with a lot of ideas, and Aphrodite might usually listen to her. But she would still listen to Aphrodite unconditionally on such matters, because what Aphrodite said would definitely not be wrong. As for the remaining 4 girls, their personalities were also different. Sheila Rodney's personality was free and easy, somewhat similar to Dana Taylor's, but also somewhat different because she almost didn't care about anything. She didn't care about how much money she made, whether she lived well, or what she wore. In short, she was very free and easy. Asheria Clive was a cute girl because she would often be absent-minded. While talking, she would look elsewhere, and then it would take a long time for her to react, and then she would blush and apologize to the other party. Bridget Nelson, on the other hand, was a very timid girl, but she would definitely complete the task given to her. Although Janice Joy was the youngest, having just turned 18 this year, she was the most gentle. Usually, Goldie and Xiaobai liked Janice very much, and Delina and Marian were also her good friends. However, although they were about the same age, Janice and the others were different from Delina and Marian. Delina and Marian were Zhang Hai's daughters in name. They had the right to live here, and they had to take the initiative to fight for it. Chapter 545. What happened next was the same as usual. They picked grapes in the afternoon, and then waited for the grapes to be picked in the evening. After dinner, it was time to take a bath in the hot spring. This afternoon, Paige Hall was as shy as Hilda was the day before. But she was much better than Hilda. She did not delay her work, and even when she looked at Zhang Hai, there was nothing strange. She would just quietly look at Zhang Hai during the break, waiting for the night to fall. Finally, the sky gradually darkened. Boston got bright and dark early, just like the northeast of China. At around 6 o'clock, the sky was already a little dark. Dulles and the others had finished picking the grapes and were ready to go to bed after dinner. But before dinner was ready, an old car drove to the gate of Zhang Hai's manor. In fact, the people of Winthrop were familiar with this car, because the owner of the car was none other than the car of Wharton Kirk, the mayor of Winthrop, who was nominally the largest town in the town. Seeing the mayor coming, Zhang Hai did not wait for dinner and directly opened the door to let him in. "Hi, Mr. Mayor, what can I do for you?" Looking at Mayor Wallace, who got out of the car after driving to the parking lot, Zhang Hai asked him. In addition to him, there were 3 people around him. They were basically not young, about the same age as him. After the 4 people got out of the car, they were still talking and laughing. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Mayor Wallace also greeted him. "Oh Zhang, it's like this, these 3 are my old friends. They heard that we are doing tourism here, and it's quite popular, so they came to take a look. At night, us old guys can't sleep, so we are going to go fishing. There are no suitable boats in the town, and some fishing boats have to pick up tourists to play tomorrow morning, so I thought of borrowing a boat from you." Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Mayor Wallace smiled quite happily. Recently, he had been beaming with success, just like the smile on his face right now. Winthrop's tourism industry, with the help of Zhang Hai, had been fully developed. Up to now, they had received a total of more than 900 tourists from Huaxia. These tourists were generous and kind. Of course, the most important thing was that they were generous. In addition to buying lobsters from Zhang Hai, they would also buy makeup products, clothes, bags, and so on. Naturally, they also had money for going out to play, shooting ranges, horse ranches, going out to sea, eating seafood and so on. On average, each person would spend about $1,000 to play here for 5 days. In fact, this was not a lot. Of course, if you were poor and did not buy anything, but the tourists from Huaxia would more or less buy something. These things were very expensive in China, but they were very cheap here. Most importantly, the quality here was very good. Speaking of which, her clothes and makeup products were brought back from the United States, so 13 spaces would instantly increase. So the tour guides on Zhang Hai's side didn't take the tourists to any shopping centers at all. They had to find and buy these things themselves, which was why they didn't have any complaints. With $1,000 per person, even if there were more than 900 people, Winthrop had already earned $900,000 this month, and that was not including the money for the tour groups to stay here. Zhang Hai could get about $250,000 of the $900,000, and the remaining $600,000 or so came from Winthrop's town hall and the residents here. Winthrop wasn't big to begin with, and every store here earned about $10,000. $10,000. That would be $120,000 a year, and that was only the money given by the Chinese tourists. His regular income was also included. It wasn't hard for the people who opened restaurants or small shops to earn more than $200,000 a year. Thinking about it, they were a little excited. They were sincerely happy for Mayor Wallace and Zhang Hai, who had brought such a big change to them. Mayor Wallace used the town hall's income to make money. Not only did he fix the public transportation system, but he also hired a lot of cleaners to ensure that the land and the sea were clean. After all, they relied on these things to make a living, so they naturally had to clean up properly. At the same time, It solved a lot of work problems. White Americans disdained to do this kind of garbage collection work. Black people were too arrogant and didn't like to do it. But immigrants from small countries still liked this kind of work because it wasn't too busy and paid well. Because of this, the Boston government specially sent Winthrop's town hall a commendation. After all, the current environment wasn't very good. Solving the work problems would be a great help to the government. Therefore, Mayor Wallace had been living quite well recently. At the same time, because Winthrop had become famous, many Americans nearby also came here to play. After all, for them, playing in Winthrop was much cheaper than going to a famous beach. For example, his old friends might not have seen each other for a few years, but now that Winthrop had become famous, they also came to play. But what was the night fishing they were talking about? No problem, but what's the matter with night fishing? There won't be any risks, right? When he heard Mayor Wallace's words, Zhang Hai nodded. It's just borrowing a boat, not his yacht. He didn't care much about the boat, but he was curious about night fishing. These old men wouldn't want to go fishing in the open sea for a night. That would be very dangerous. Zhang Hai didn't think that Mayor Wallace would want to go fishing for a night. Well, it's dangerous more or less. We are going to go fishing in the open sea. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Mayor Wallace said with a smile, and hearing his words, the three old men around him seemed to be even more excited. Go to the open sea? That's too dangerous. It's summer recently. Although there is no storm warning, everything is not accurate. Why don't you just fish in my fishing ground? Hearing Mayor Wallace's words, Zhang Hai said with some worry. Summer is the most important season for typhoons. Generally speaking, ships will avoid going out to sea during this time. Although it was already September, according to Huaxia's saying, it wasn't the end of the season yet. Even if it's summer, it's easy to have accidents in summer, especially at night. These old men are too bold. Fishing here? We can't fish anything here. We still have to go to the open sea. Who knew that it would be better if Zhang Hai didn't say it, but as soon as Mayor Wallace said, he almost spat out a mouthful of salt soda at Zhang Hai. He looked at Zhang Hai with a look of contempt. Hearing his words, Zhang Hai also smiled a little awkwardly. Indeed, the fish in Zhang Hai's fishing ground are not easy to catch now. He doesn't know if it's because of the watergrass with spiritual energy or the feed that has made these fishes smarter, or their taste has become better. Of course, it's also possible that it's both. Anyway, the fish in Zhang Hai's fishing ground are quite difficult to catch. Generally speaking, if you come to Zhang Hai's fishing ground to fish with the best clam silkworms, the success rate of catching fish is pitifully low. In the past, when Mayor Wallace was bored, he came to chat with Zhang Hai. When he heard that Zhang Hai had a lot of good fish here, he became interested and wanted to go fishing once to take a look. One must know that there was no one on the coast who didn't know how to fish. But who would have thought that after 3 hours of fishing, he would only catch 2 palm-sized fish? This made him very worried that Zhang Hai would suffer a loss. So he took a pair of swimming goggles and went into the sea to take a look. As a result, he found that the fish in Zhang Hai's waters were dense. The density of the fish was not normal. Or in the sea, those places where fish were concentrated might not be so dense. But these fish didn't mix with the water, they didn't die, they were alive and kicking, and they didn't want to be caught. Since then, he knew that Zhang Hai's fishing ground was strange. He would rather fish for codfish at the small dock in Winthrop than come here to fish for grouper. So now, when he heard that Zhang Hai wanted to fish here, he almost spat at Zhang Hai to death. Okay, then I'll borrow your boat to fish, but I'd better go with you. I don't feel at ease letting you go alone. Looking at Mayor Wallace's murderous look, Zhang Hai also raised his hands to show that he surrendered. You're going too? Are you okay? What's wrong? You don't want to leave your boat. Hearing that Zhang Hai also wanted to go, Mayor Wallace laughed. I'm okay? How can I be okay? It's not that I don't want to leave my broken boat, but I'm afraid that if anything happens to you, the people in Winthrop will eat me alive. Anyway, you can fish here, or I'll go with you. How could Zhang Hai be okay? He had a date with a beautiful woman. Although he didn't know who would come tonight, he guessed that someone would definitely come. But Mayor Wallace and the others were more excited, and Zhang Hai definitely couldn't persuade them to go back. Rather than that, he might as well go with them directly. It was unlikely that these old men would really fish for the whole night. Okay then, when do we set off? Mayor Wallace also knew that Zhang Hai was worried about them, but they also knew that they weren't young anymore, and it would be more reassuring to let a young man like Zhang Hai follow them. So Mayor Wallace also raised his hand, indicating that he would rather let Zhang Hai follow than fish here. Absolutely. I haven't eaten yet. Wait for me to finish eating. Zhang Hai looked at the four excited old men in front of him and couldn't help but say helplessly. Then he wanted to let them in, but the four of them didn't want to go in. Instead, they sat directly on the chairs outside the villa and chatted there. As for Zhang Hai, after entering the room, he first had dinner with everyone. Then he apologized to Aphrodite because he didn't know who to say it to, so he could only let Aphrodite do it for him. Chapter 546. No need to apologize, I think she'll be happy to wait for you. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Aphrodite smiled. There were only a few grapes left to harvest tomorrow, so it didn't matter if Zhang Hai or someone else was absent. Hearing her words, Zhang Hai couldn't help but be a little speechless, but he didn't refuse. Instead, he smiled and touched his nose, then packed his things and left. The five of them went fishing outside, so naturally, a lot of things were indispensable. For example, beer. 5 people sitting outside enjoying the sea breeze. If there wasn't anything to drink, who could stand it? For example, some snacks such as fish fillets, fish bones, and shredded squid were all produced by Zhang Hai. When Mrs. Philemon and the others had nothing to do, they would dry some and make some to eat as snacks. After all, the fishermen and cowboys were usually quite bored at work, so if they made a lot of food, they would naturally send it to Zhang Hai. Zhang Hai didn't care much about these snacks, but the girls liked them very much. Unknowingly, he took a big bag of things and 2 boxes of beer before leaving the room. As soon as he walked out of the villa, the 4 old men saw the beer in Zhang Hai's hand, and their eyes lit up. Although they were all foreigners, and although they were all Europeans, people liked to drink different things. For example, people in Western Europe like to drink red wine, people in Central Europe like to drink brandy, and people in Northern Europe like to drink vodka. People in South America like to drink fruit wine, people in the Caribbean like to drink rum, and people in the United States, because they were immigrants, drank more mixed drinks. But most people still like to drink beer, especially clear beer. It tasted good, wasn't expensive, and most importantly, didn't go to the head. They wanted to go fishing at night, but in fact, it was just a spur of the moment. They prepared some food and fishing rods, but they didn't prepare beer, but they didn't expect Zhang Hai to help them solve it. After loading these things into a 4-wheeled vehicle, Zhang Hai took these things with Mayor Wallace and his 3 old fellows and drove to Zhang Hai's pier. Zhang Hai's pier was manned 24 hours a day. Of course, if it was a typhoon or something like that, they wouldn't stay here. But if the weather was good, they would still stay here. Zhang Hai had a total of 5 fishermen: Edward Anderson, Tommy Charles, Eleanor Cece, Andrew Christian, and Marlon Rupert. These 5 people usually worked in shifts. Because Edward Anderson was only one person, he would stay here for 2 days a week. The rest of the time, the remaining 4 people would take turns. Every week, one person would stay for 2 days, and the rest of the time, one person would stay for 1 night. As long as the radio was kept running at all times, there was nothing to do. Staying here was just watching TV, drinking wine, and playing with mobile phones. The night would pass quickly. Zhang Hai and the others had already called to inform them that they were coming over to play. Tonight, the one keeping watch here was Eleanor Cece. This big black man had already prepared a boat for Zhang Hai and the others. The boat was a small boat, just like what Zhang Hai said, but his boat wasn't small. Zhang Hai's small boat was the limit of a small boat. It was 11 meters long and could seat 8 people. Regardless of size, quality, speed, stability, and so on, it was the best choice. After it was shipped over, Edward Anderson had also remodeled it. The front was the driving room, and the 2 chairs in the driving room could be placed flat, which meant that they could sleep on them. The 2 rows of benches behind the driving room could be used to fish or pulled out to form a big bed for sleeping. In other words, if Zhang Hai and the other 4 were sleepy and wanted to sleep, they could sleep here, although it would be more or less crowded. At the back, there was a steel frame hanging on both sides. It could be closed directly and covered with a rainproof cloth. It was windproof and rainproof, and it was very stable. The most important thing was that this small boat had a built-in icebox. The fish that were caught could be placed inside to be chilled. Of course, before the fish were brought up, the box could also be used to cool the wine. It was really remodeled to suit Zhang Hai's intentions. Naturally, Zhang Hai's intentions were also very much in line with Mayor Wallace's intentions. After boarding the boat, the three old men were curiously touching left and right, while Mayor Wallace sat calmly at the side, looking at the performance of these three guys who looked like country bumpkins. It must be known that he used to be a country bumpkin in front of these three people. Now, the tables had turned. This feeling of exaltation was great. Zhang Hai didn't know Mayor Wallace's mood at this time. He just checked once, and there were no problems. The fuel tank was full, and so was the auxiliary fuel tank. After everything was confirmed, Zhang Hai started the boat and headed towards the open sea. Wow, this boat doesn't look big, but it's really good. Sitting next to Zhang Hai, one of the old men smiled and patted the edge of Zhang Hai's boat. Hearing his words, several people next to him nodded. By the way, Zhang Hai, I haven't introduced these old men to you yet. Since I'm free now, let me introduce them to you. Hearing the old men chatting happily, Mayor Wallace also came over and said to Zhang Hai with a smile, "This is Gray Gary, a professor of economics at Harvard University. This is Wilcox Arnold, a trader who worked on Wall Street in New York, but now he has retired. He is mainly a consultant. If you want to invest in stocks, well, I won't let you go into the fire pit." Hearing Mayor Wallace's words, Zhang Hai also laughed. He knew that he didn't have the fate or luck. Investing in stocks? It's more like cooking. He earned his money 1 cent at a time. He would not use his own money to play such a risky game. Then Mayor Wallace introduced them. These three people used to be classmates with Mayor Wallace in college, and they were in the same dormitory. It can be said that their relationship is quite solid. Of course, they studied different majors, so after graduating from college, they went their separate ways. But after all, they were college classmates, so their relationship was still very close. When they were young, they often played together. Later, when they were middle-aged, they began to get busy, so they lost contact. When they were old and had nothing to do, they got in touch again. For the life of these old men, Zhang Hai is still very much in agreement. He estimated that he will be like this in the future. Whether it is in Xueqi or the United States, when a person begins to reminisce about the situation when he was young, it proves that this person is old. The four old men around Zhang Hai are naturally old, so reminiscing about the past is inevitable. After the introduction, the four of them began to boast about how powerful they were in the past and how they attracted the favor of the young girls. Then the other three would refute. If they couldn't refute, they would take the initiative to change the topic. Half an hour later, the beer was cold, so they ate snacks while drinking beer and bragging. After driving for more than 3 hours, Zhang Hai left his fish farm and came to the open sea area. It can't be helped. Zhang Hai's fish farm is too big, and in these 3 hours, these old men just talked most of the time and didn't drink too much. So they are still very sober now. After arriving at the place, they quickly began to get busy. They put the fishing rods on, hooked, and got lead. Zhang Hai also turned on the fish baiting light. At night, it is the time for most fish to hunt for food. Fish have the ability to attract light. When the colorful lights around the hull flashed, the fish under the sea would be attracted by these lights and run to the edge of the boat, making it much easier to catch them. After Old Man God finished setting up the fishing gear at this time, he also opened a big bag that they carried with them. There are a lot of things in it, but the most important thing is the insect repellent light and insect repellent bracelet. He also gave a pair to Zhang Hai. To be honest, in Zhang Hai's opinion, the best way to get rid of insects is 6-God or essential balm. However, maybe foreigners don't like this kind of smell, so few people in the United States sell this kind of stuff. After everything was ready, Zhang Hai also went to the bow and picked up his rather unprofessional fishing rod. After putting on the fishing line, he was ready to fish. Looking at Zhang Hai's movements, the four old men couldn't help but laugh. "Zhang, although you raise fish, it seems that you don't know how to fish. There is an old saying in Xueqi, sharpening the axe will not delay the cutting of firewood. You don't even have something that suits you, how can you catch fish?" The one who spoke was Gray Gary. This old man was a university professor. Naturally, he had a way with words. That's right, look at my things. This is Kevlar's elastic fishing rod. It's very elastic and light. This fishing line is also a good invisible fishing line. No matter how good the fish's eyesight is, they can't see this line. Only with this can you catch good fish. Wilcox Arnold, the wealthiest of the four, saw that Gary had spoken, so he smiled and said, "That's right. This Wilcox's equipment is really good." Zhang Hai saw a set of fishing equipment. If he bought all of it, it would cost more than $10,000. One must know that this is $10,000, not 10,000 yuan. This means that this set of fishing equipment can be sold for this price in the United States. The price in China can be imagined. He has to admit that these old men are really willing to spend money. Let's try fishing. Hearing the old man's words, Zhang Hai also smiled. Originally, he didn't intend to steal the limelight, but being looked down upon by others is not his style, so he said to the four old men with a smile, "Okay, let us teach you how to fish. The two people who catch the least will be responsible for grilling the fish." Hearing Zhang Hai's words, the four old men also had an idea and immediately said to Zhang Hai. In their view, the person responsible for grilling the fish is definitely Zhang Hai. As for why it's two people, even if it's the four of them, there will still be a winner. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.